Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, April 30th, 2024 study session of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with all council members present this evening. We have 3 items on our agenda this evening for our study session, beginning with item 2A, which is the Olympia Armory Creative Campus Project Update and Anchor Partners Introduction. And so to kick off the introduction for our anchor partners this evening, we have Valerie Roberts, who is the Armory's building manager. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, Mayor Payne and council members for having me today, and representatives from our anchor partners who are sitting behind me. I'm excited to introduce 8 organizations that have been selected to enter into contract negotiations in order to become anchor partners at the Olympia Armory. But before I bring up our partners to introduce them, I want to give a quick summary of where we are in this project overall. A reminder, the Olympia Armory, which you can see in this photo here, is a 3-story facility with about 50,000 square feet of space that will be transformed into a community arts center. It has a 10,000 square foot drill hall, an entire basement of rooms and offices and classrooms and conference rooms, and even a kitchen. The Armory will need to undergo a series of phased upgrades to fulfill the vision of the Olympia community. There's some necessary essential safety and ADA upgrades that are needed. Through a community-driven visioning process in 2022, a model of how we will transform this building to the Dream Art Center was identified in the form of a concept plan. In that, an operational model was chosen that the City of Olympia would retain ownership of the building. Some central rooms would be available for the community to reserve for events, including that 10,000 square foot drill hall, conference room, a kitchen, and a central basement space. And then the rest of the other portions of the Armory would be leased to community arts nonprofits who will activate the space through their programming. Those are the anchor partners. Capital investments needed to upgrade this 1939-38 building will be including an elevator, other ADA improvements, bringing the building into compliance with current safety and fire requirements, and retrofitting each space so that it can be used by Olympia's creative community to make and connect. So through a request for qualifications process and a community representative selection committee, 8 community arts nonprofits were identified and offered the opportunity to enter into contract negotiations for tenancy at the Armory, as well as, these 8 organizations will also be working with city staff, the Department of Enterprise Services, and Amoresco to help inform the approach to our Phase 1 design and construction. So they were very excited to have them on board and help us inform with their expertise. Okay. So these community arts nonprofit organizations who will negotiate long-term leases, and when I say long-term, it's between 5 and 10 years at the Armory. As a part of this agreement, they will continue their missions through providing accessible arts education, skills building, equipment, and resources to the community. And they will also agree to a certain partnership, to a partnership agreement within that lease. They will participate in a monthly Armory advisory group. They will ensure a commitment to safe, affordable space and community opportunities at the Armory, help pursue collaborative operations development for the building. They'll pursue grant and funding opportunities collectively with the Armory as well. In that commitment, they also will provide 1 free class per month, and they will conduct a minimum of 10 staffed open studio hours per week for community use, or they will work with other organizations to create that opportunity within the spaces that they lease. And they will commit to reporting annually consistent data that we can collectively measure as the Armory group. Those include reports on their programming, demographics of the audiences that they serve, partnerships that they have entered into, and collaborations that they see, as well as insights on their future strategic goals. And what that will do is that'll allow us to see collectively the impact of the Armory, even though we are 8 individual organizations and the city becoming one united partnership. Now, I'd like to invite up a representative from each 8 organization to introduce themselves and give other people a chance to share and shine. They're going to share a little bit about who they serve and what programming they look forward to bringing to the Olympia Armory. There are a few guests that are not listed in your staff report. We're very excited to have some additional people coming in. They will introduce themselves by name when they come up to the mic, to introduce their organization. And with that, I'm going to, and if there is no representative for the organization, I'll do a little bit of talking about that organization. With that, I'm going to move on to the Bridge Music Project. It looks like that is run by Bobby Williams. The Bridge Music Project, through music and mentorship, works with youth to create opportunities for them to express themselves through music. They are a really important partner for the city. They've worked with the Parks, Arts, and Recreation Department many, many times. They were a part of the July interventions, and they have also participated in Arts Walk many times. They do a show called The Flow Case. They work here in Olympia. They are a very well-known entity with high school age youth in the area. Every time I run into somebody from Avanti, they know Bobby. And they have been very influential in the Armory project from the very beginning. They've been invested in participating and actively advocating for a safe place for them to be able to work with youth and make the Armory a engaging place for youth and a place where music can happen. Okay, and I'll have a representative for Capital City Pride come on up.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you, Valerie. I'm here, Natalie Koblenz. My pronouns are they, them. I'm here to represent Capital City Pride, and we represent the LGBTQIA2+ community here in Olympia of all ages. And so we're just really excited to partner with everyone, everyone including the city and including the Armory and including everyone here, because we have some programs that are going to go about. We have a classroom setting, and we also have a wood workshop and metal workshop area. So we're excited about the classroom setting because we're going to be providing computers and creative software like Adobe and other media-based programs. And some of the kindling for that is that we did a survey in the queer community to say, what do you want? And so this is what they want. So we're excited because we have a lot of LGBTQIA2+ journalists that want to start creating their own kind of free weekly newspaper that encourages people to go to the events in the queer community and talk about and interview others in the communities. And then we have our wood workshop, which will be for any festival. We can collaborate and build larger structures and have more art and more light art and also teach people how to do theater flats or basic woodworking or basic metalwork just to kick them off so that they can do fun structures and just develop their skills. So that's what we're going to be doing over at the Armory.
Thank you, Natalie. Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Next, I'm going to have, it looks like, Kelsey, there you are.
I skated in.
Come on in. I'm going to have Kelsey come on up for community print.
Okay. I took notes so I wouldn't forget things. And also, will you tell me if I go over 2 minutes? Okay. Find my notes. Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. My name is Kelsey Smith, as Valerie said. I've been running community print for maybe 12 years, and I have a board member in the audience, Kitty Koppelman. Thanks for being here, Kitty. Just a little bit about community print. We started way back in 1996 in the building that is now the Olympia Knitting Mills, 508 Legion. We've been in probably 10 to 12 different spaces over the course of 25 years, and much of what we have is very heavy, so moving a lot is kind of a drag. So we're really excited to move into the Armory and have a stable community space to collaborate with other folks. So as this says, we're a member-run, community-supported printmaking studio. We mostly focus on letterpress printing, but in the past couple years since we've moved into our new space, we're doing collage and zine making, and we have a new risograph printer and self-publishing things related to paper and ink, basically. And anyone can become a member, and then you can access the studio space, which is really nice, especially for people. We have a lot of Evergreen graduates that finish and they don't have access to a studio, so they can come in and use our equipment. In 2023, we had 20 classes. We moved into our new space at the end of 2022. And we collaborated with Evergreen. We taught some first grade Girl Scouts how to print. We've done a lot of really fun things. And so far this year, in 2024, it's only April, I guess it's almost May, but we've taught 13 classes. We've had 4 collage nights in partnership with 3 magnets. And we've done 3 special events with printmakers from all over the place. So we're really excited to participate in the Armory project, and we're happy to have been chosen. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's probably over 2 minutes.
Thank you, that was wonderful. It was perfect. Okay, and now I'm going to have Evangeline come in for Hummingbird Studio.
Hello, I am Evangeline Poulos, and I'm a Community Programs Coordinator with Hummingbird Studio. And actually, Kokua Services are a fiscal sponsor and our greater organization. Kokua Services provides individuals with disabilities the support needed to live full and meaningful lives. Hummingbird Studios is one of our community programs. We provide people with the supplies and the inclusive space to build community and get in touch with their creativity. We believe that art belongs to everyone, and that access to the arts, whether you're making it or just being in the space while it's being made, it really fosters a healthy community, a more loving community. And at the Armory, we're so thrilled to have this opportunity. At the Armory, we will host 3 hour-and-a-half sessions, multiple days a week. We intend to have workshops and performances in that space. People of all ages and abilities are encouraged to attend and get to know artists they wouldn't otherwise get to meet. We also plan to open Hummingbird Cafe at the Armory. It is a social enterprise, or will be, that provides job training opportunities for people with disabilities and hopefully some excellent coffee. The Armory will definitely need that. So yeah, we hope that once everything's open, we would love to see some of you in our wonderful space, make some art with us, have a cup of coffee. Again, we're just so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be an anchor partner, and we're so thankful that we have a city council that invests in the arts and in a more inclusive community. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, next is Oli Film. Come on up, Jeff.
Yeah, I also have notes. Mr. Mayor, council persons, members. I'm Jeff Bearhan. I'm a co-founder and current board president of the Olympia Film Collective, or Oli Film as we call ourselves. When I moved to Olympia 14 years ago, I had to resort to Craigslist to find people to make films with, and at that time that there was really no place for filmmakers. Fortunately, I found collaborators who helped make my first short film, shot at the Brotherhood Lounge and what used to be the Volcano Vapor Cafe. We had such a great time, we decided to keep doing it. And we put out a website, social media, and soon we became the hub for budding filmmakers from all over the South Sound, from as far as Tacoma, Chehalis, Grace Harbor, all of the South Sound, really. I think part of our motto was we don't talk about films, we make films, and we set out making a lot. And you'll see momentarily a little video of just some of the things we've created. So we also became a 501c3. We developed programs for educating young people as young as 10 years old, working film camps in the summer. We developed programs for those interested in documentaries and screenwriting, and these served all ages, including residents from Panorama, the retirement community. We started the Intertribal Youth Film Project to give local Indigenous youth access to filmmaking opportunities. Our last two Intertribal Youth Film Projects were helmed by Indigenous females, one from the Squaxin Island tribe and the other from the Makah tribe, both of whom had never written or directed before. Now they are both studying film at the university level. At one of our latest production meetings, I was really proud to just look out and see that 45% of those in attendance were female. When we started out that number, and for many years that number was 0. We are truly making strides to be inclusive, to be equitable, and to be champions of underrepresented groups. So at the Armory, we intend to continue to do what we have always done, provide educational speakers or film training events, host screenwriting groups, documentary groups, production groups, networking groups, participate in film competitions, create monthly podcasts, provide micro food grants for film shoots, access to film equipment, space for indoor film production, and access to computers and filmmaking software. Or we'll let Natalie do that for us. In short, we will continue to do what we have successfully done for the past 11 years, and that's make local films for a global audience, develop the pipeline for the next generation of filmmakers, and elevate the creative economy in Washington State. So when I said when I came to Olympia, there was no place for filmmakers, as an anchor partner at the Armory, we now have a home, and that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't have your video in the PowerPoint, but I'll send it afterwards. I'll promise. I promise to send it to everyone. It's really good. I don't know why I kept it in my pocket. Okay, I'm going to bring up Olympia Lamplighters. Avalon?
Hello. I don't have a name tag because I was doing some other family stuff, so forgive me. My name is Avalon Cragnes. I'm with Olympia Lamplighters. We actually started about 4.5 years ago. A couple of my business partners at the time wanted a space to come in and create their artwork without having to be in a coffee shop and have the pressure of having to leave the coffee shop when they're in the middle of their artwork. So we are a co-working art space. So we're a place for artists to come in, create their artwork, and as well as a place to sell it as well. So we're a co-working space, a gallery. We also do art classes. One of our main things that we'll be continuing to do once we get into the Armory is our weekly figure drawing class, which is something that is 18 and older just because of the content of the class. But we do have other classes as well that are youth-based. So we've had multiple classes in the past that we're going to continue to keep doing that will cater to people from 11, 12 years of age, all the way up until they don't think that they want that anymore. It's a great way to, we've also worked together closely with CARE, and I always forget what their acronym stands for, as well as Our ARC, which are two organizations that help youth and houseless folks that are trying to get out of the cycles. So we have them come in. I know CARE's done several of their mentoring and their sessions inside the space. CARE actually started their nonprofit in our space, which was awesome. So we work together with other local nonprofits to get kids and to get other people into the space in order to create their artwork so they can have that creativity, and it's a safe space. We also do, in addition to the classes, we also have an audio recording room. We have a audio engineer that comes in and offers, he's going to be doing some classes as well. So once we come in the Armory, we'll be working very closely. We're in talks with some of the other organizations here. So our plan is to really work with cohesion with all of the different groups, because we do a lot of, we're kind of a hub that we are wanting to be, let's put it that way, of a hub for artists. And then we can be like, hey, you want to do film? Cool, go talk to these guys. You want to do, this, go talk to these guys. They're just right down the road, or right down the hallway. Cool. So our biggest thing is co-working space and classes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Park Foundation of Thurston County is another partner, and I'm just going to take a peek. Okay, it's me. I'm really excited to have the Park Foundation of Thurston County join us as a partner. They're going to be taking an office on at the Armory. Although they do a lot with all parks, arts, and recreation, for the arts, one of the big things that they do is they work with individual artists in order to help them receive grants through their nonprofit and help them with contracting and facilitate funding for projects to happen for individuals. So they will be helping individual artists who do not own their own nonprofit to be able to come in and engage with the Armory space, but then also in the greater community. They have a far-reaching impact with artists and arts organizations, and then they also work very closely with the City of Olympia Parks, Arts, and Recreation Department to make amazing things happen. We're very excited to have them there. I know Jim Camber, who is the staff member at the Park Foundation, has talked to me about wanting to make their office space available to artists that just need a place to be able to work. That's a thoughtful zone near the hub of activity and be able to connect them with other organizations and be that kind of central brain space where these artists can be connected to other organizations and other people making things happen. Okay, TC Media.
Hello, my name's Megan Murphy-Ross, and I've had the pleasure of meeting some of you along the line. And I am the president of the board for TC Media. Very happy to be here and very excited to be a part of the Armory partnership. That's super exciting for all of us. As some of you know, TC Media has been evolving and reinventing, and that's been a bit of a challenge, but it's also one that we are willing to take on. So with that, we have been spending a lot of time reinventing, but also pulling with that reinvention the strengths that we have. So some of the things like our youth summer camp, which we have increased by 25% for this coming summer. Also, the whole idea of being a digital media maker. I know we have a lot of crossover with some of the existing partners, and I see that we could be a real resource and assist and collaborate. So that's really exciting too. And then as we move into the next couple of years, of course, things will be changing, and we're super excited about that. It was just this past weekend being at the procession and doing live switching and having that on the air broadcasting on Channel 22, like an hour later was, I think, a real feather in the cap of where we're headed and what we can do. So I'm excited about where we're going with the park. When we toured through and we saw all these empty, dusty classrooms, it was really easy to just see all these kids and people in there. And same thing with the grassy field. It's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be really something. So we're super excited, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk today. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so those are our 8 organizations that will be moving into the Armory. We're so excited to have them. I have to say that the entire process, starting the request for qualification and the lease agreement, and then finding these partners, reading the applications with the community group, and then the selection, I am so thrilled and excited to see all of these organizations moving into one spot. And from the get-go, all of them have immediately been like, oh, we could collaborate with this other organization. We could do this together. And I can see us, sending people down the hallway. You can hear the collaborative nature. I'm very excited. So our tasks ahead of us as a collective. This year, we are individually and collectively working on developing business plans. That will be part of the lease negotiation strategy, and also I am developing a business plan for the Armory as a whole as well. So we will have that for anyone who wants to read it next year. And then the other thing is we're going to be looking for finding collaborative opportunities, sharing spaces. What does sharing spaces look like? And then we will be working with our contractors to help inform Phase 1 construction. Next year, the partners will review and align our business plans. We will negotiate the lease agreements, and we will begin collectively planning for the Armory's opening, which is currently slated for 2026. Fingers crossed. Before I leave it open to you all for comments and questions, I just want to show you the preliminary space plans that we've developed. These are from our meetings with the anchor partners. I'm starting at the top floor, which is shaped like a U, and it has 2 roofs that look like classrooms. So just anything that's not colored, ignore. It's not very viable. The green is a shared classroom, so that's where all partners could potentially use that space for resources. We've got the Park Foundation's office. Pride has an office and a mini classroom. Bridge has an office. TC Media has an office. And then Hummingbird Studio has a classroom and 2 offices for their community arts studio sessions. This is the main floor. You'll notice that there are no anchor partners on this floor. That's because the drill hall, the kitchen, and the conference room are reservable to the public for short-term reservations, creating a mix of opportunities for people to engage not only through partners, but directly through the Armory reservation system. Examples of programs that we've had there already, we had a motorcycle show. We had a roller derby match. We had many arts markets, very cool. We had a sticker fest. We had a punk rock flea market. I'm trying to think of other ones. Basketball, yes. Lots of cool programming opportunities that we're going to keep available. And then the basement and the annex. I will note that the annex is a bit like Alaska on a map. It's a little smaller than it is in real life comparatively, but I wanted to fit it on the PowerPoint. So Annex is our back building, also known as like the garage. It's the ancillary building in the back. We've got TC Media's production studio in there. Parks, Arts, and Recreation ceramics program will move there from the Olympia Center. And then Pride's workshop. And then inside of the main building in the basement, we have Hummingbird Cafe. That is the old caretaker's apartment, very cute. Community print. The Bridge has a music production studio and then practice rooms for their students. Holy Film has an office and a prop room. We have a shared new media classroom. Then we have lamplighters on the other side. We have a big area for shared storage in the old firing range. And then that tiny little yellow square that's not labeled because it's too small is the lamplighters production or recording studio. And then that central basement community space, that is also reservable for short-term reservations for the community. So you can see we're packing in a lot of really good content in the building. It's funny how 50,000 square feet will shrink down really fast. But it's going to be a really fun and dynamic space, and we're hoping to find many, many ways that the community can engage in all aspects of it. And with that, I'm going to put my little thank you screen up here, and I'm happy to open it up for comments or questions as you like.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you to all the presenters, not just for being here tonight, but for your partnership. I see a lot of collaboration happening. This is really exciting. And before I ask my questions, I'll turn it over to council, see if you have any questions. Councilmember Parsley.
Thank you, Valerie. You're making true what the vision of this building was for. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate all our anchor partners, because that's how it's going to happen. I had an idea, and it may get shot down, but I was in the basement at the Journey to Jobs, and all of the procession partially built floats were down there. And I was thinking, oh my God, this would be a great Halloween haunted house. And you could do a Halloween celebration down there with your anchor partners and the main floor. Just a thought, because it was a little scary down there when this thing was reaching over my head and I backed up into it.
I love that idea. Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you. I'm so appreciative of all of your work to try to make this happen together. I'm curious about what happens between last summer's interventions and a 26 grand opening over these 18 months or so. What kind of use would you see, and how would the anchor tenants be involved?
That's a really great question. A couple of things that a lot of what's going to happen at the Armory over the next 2 years will be not the most sparkly, but very important. We're going to be putting in an elevator. We'll be mostly shut down for construction because there are some very, very essentially things that need to happen to that building that will impact our ability to use it. For example, fire alarms and sprinklers need to go in. We need to increase the electrical load of the building and then rewire the electrical. We have to replumb the bathrooms and make them ADA compliant and not just for one gender. And we need to, what else do we need to do? We have lots of things. We have to upgrade all the HVAC. We need to make sure that there's good airflow downstairs and make sure it doesn't smell dingy. We need to remove the dust from the office. We need to stop it from leaking. So there will be a lot of really important things happening, but it's probably going to be kind of quiet. Over the next 2 years, the anchor partners are going to be working with me to create the best collaborative opening we can for when they can access the building. And I am hatching some evil plans to activate the outside of the space while we're under construction. So hopefully you'll see some fun things happen outside of the building while we are closed.
Well, then, thank you all for your long-term planning and thinking, because it's a while from now. So I appreciate that you're willing to dig in and help make this vision ahead of doing the tenant improvements.
Yes.
Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Yeah, I wanted to thank all the anchor tenants who came in and shared about your organizations. And one of the common themes I'm hearing from you all is that you needed a home. And now you have one together. Yay. And it's interesting, Valerie, that you just mentioned like the outside of the space. That's a really good segue into my comment, which is it's something I shared earlier on, maybe even before you were with us. But, you know, as you were going through your slides, one of the slides showed, you know, community gardens in part of the outside space. And we, you know, the Parks Department is working with Thurston Conservation District to establish new community gardens. So, you know, they may be a good partner for the external part of the space. And especially as more and more people are coming into the Armory, you know, community gardens rely heavily on volunteers. But just the fact that there's, you know, open green space right there and a kitchen right there and a ton of people who are going to be around. I think that that's something I'd encourage you to see if we can find a way to make that work in the space. But overall, just really want to thank you for bringing together like all these really amazing organizations and lovely people, and I really look forward to seeing it all come together. Thank you. Yes.
Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. Yeah, so other than the drill floor use, I've been struggling with like the vision until tonight. And so it's really cool to hear all of the like different yet aligned partners and kind of try to imagine what could happen and when everyone gets in the same room and starts bringing stuff out of their shop to the main floor. It could be pretty powerful a lot of the day, I bet. So I'm really excited. My question is about energy. And I'm curious if we've been able to get in conversations with Puget Sound Energy or the Department of Commerce around putting solar on that property, storing energy on that property for the neighborhood. As we know, those technologies are coming online, and there's a lot of grant money in that space right now.
Yeah, that's a really, another good question. I feel like I start that off as a great question. You all have really wonderful questions. I know, gotta. We are definitely considering that. One of the reasons why we selected the Department of Enterprise Services Energy Savings Program for our Phase 1 audit and also for Phase 1 construction and working with Amoresco is because a lot of what they do is through an energy conservation lens. And so they're going to be doing their investment in grade audit in order to investigate the full capacity of where we can find energy savings and climate-friendly renovation plans. And even if solar doesn't go in Phase 1, the investigation into what capacity we need to install in order for solar to intuitively be put in Phase 2 or 3 is all being investigated right now. Yes, so we will have, at the end of our investment grade audit in August, we will have a full plan of up to 80% of what the full scope of the armory will look like, and all of it will be designed from an energy conservation viewpoint. So we're hoping solar will happen soon.
Thank you, and I just want to put an extra plug in for the storage conversation, because I think that's a little bit different than just that site and something that we need to start reproducing in our community, and using public space for that is a great model, so thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen, followed by Councilmember Vanderpool.
Great presentation, Valerie. Yeah, and you got all these great folks to come here tonight. I also am feeling a lot of gratitude and excitement, as I think we all are, for that 2026 date and just kind of watching the Armory transform. Maybe we'll get a sneak peek, maybe we won't. But and I also just it's really lovely to see the different types of anchor partners too, not only on like what their specific arts focus is, but then also on the different community groups that they sort of appeal to, while still, it sounds like they're hearing from the different anchor partners that they'll be open to people that are just curious and learning about them for the first time, right? And so that's really lovely. I think about the mini community, like open house sessions that the Armory had and all of that community feedback. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with that feedback and maybe how it informed these anchor partners being chosen? And then also, there were some thoughts on like having the culinary arts, having I don't exactly know how I'd categorize it, but like more like industrial, like big moving pieces, things that get a little bit messier out in the garage area. I know I heard a lot of musicians, both independent and then also in a band, really hurting for that recording space or rehearsal space. So I know we can't make all the things come alive at once, but can you talk a little bit about that, about the community and the feedback given, and what are we doing with it at this point, and then hopefully we'll hold on to it for future?
Yes, absolutely. All of the community feedback that we received coalesced into the 2022 concept plan, which is the guiding document for my work. A lot of what the community feedback did was inform the steps that are recommended in the concept plan. That included a map in the concept plan of different spaces and what they could be used for. And then it also recommended that operational strategy of the city owning the building and then collaboratively working with nonprofit arts organizations to lease the building and provide the programming that would realize those wants, needs, and desires in the concept plan. And so when we went through the RFQ process to identify anchor partners, the selection criteria was made in such a way in order for us to have organizations that were mission aligned with the mission from the draft mission from the concept plan that was the coalesce of what the desire of the community was. They needed to be able to fit within the space matrix that was identified in the concept plan. So all of the maps that you see on this presentation are very close or in alignment with what was identified as like potential uses in the concept plan. And then they needed to be able to serve a wide depth and breadth of the community collectively. And they needed to provide a diversity of arts experiences. And so the selection criteria that helped inform what anchor partners we selected were based off of the concept plan and what the needs addressed were in that from the community. That being said, who applied as an anchor partner directly dictated what mix we ended up with, which we ended up with a really great mix. But that being that, in addition to that, if there are gaps that we notice after our anchor partners gather together, for example, no one has asked to take on the kitchen and turn it into a culinary arts organized and nonprofit-run entity. So that is sitting and waiting to become in one way or another. I think the concept plan is something we're going to be constantly going back to. It's guiding my work in the sense of how we build the operational strategy, how we've built the lease agreement with the nonprofit arts organizations so that asking them to provide access to their spaces 10 hours a week or one free class, all of those things are the mechanisms to help create the asks that we heard from our community in the concept plan. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to just have a follow-up? One of the slides you showed with kind of like the blueprint or the map of the building, there was that ground floor where the drill hall is.
Yes.
Yeah, so I understand that there will be some construction, so it'll be closed down for a little bit. But am I to understand that theoretically any artist could come in and want to do a thing and could just rent some space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of the reason why we did that is we have 8 wonderful nonprofits that already do amazing work and have amazing programs. And then there are people who want to access the Armory and have great and wonderful magical ideas that are not nonprofit partners that live in the building for a long time. So we're coming up with multiple mechanisms for all of the community to engage with the space through short-term reservations and then long-term rentals or leases where they work with community groups as well. And then as time develops, we might be able to come up with other models. That's kind of another task I'm going to work on myself is what does it look like for somebody to rent the kitchen for 6 months? How do we do that? So those will be future work for me so that we can come up with multiple great ways for a vast variety of community partners to come in and activate the space, or just community members to come in and have talent shows or dance performances or whatever they please. Do you have anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, Paul Simmons, Parks, Arts, and Recreation Director, and I'll just add that as this work was coming together in the concept plan, we toured a number of armories around the area, Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, and almost every single armory that staff walked through was in some sort of evolution or remodel, no matter how long it had been in place. And so to me, that was a really important thing to pay attention to, because I think as we go, we're going to learn things. As the organizations develop and evolve, they're going to, their missions will shift and evolve. Some may move out, some may move in. And I think that we have to start somewhere, and this is a pretty amazing spot to be starting. But I also think I would expect that over time that this building will likely be in a constant state of evolution as we move forward. And we're going to learn things, and there will be future opportunities. And, the life safety stuff, while it's not as exciting of a construction project, it gets the doors open, and that's really exciting. And so I think once we get the doors open, I think then that synergy will create other opportunities. And when we get that, the infrastructure is the most expensive part of it. So if we can get that done, then it's a lot easier to add smaller pieces here and there. But if we don't have the infrastructure in place, it's really hard to do that. So that's why we've prioritized, and we're taking the approach that we're taking. And Val and having the partners here, we're just very excited. But I do anticipate a constant state of evolution as we learn and grow and evolve and share the space. And another one other thought to add to that is Val is working on putting together the format for kind of a advisory group that would be maybe a little more informal, but that the anchor partners and community members could be a part of, that would help shape kind of decisions as we evolve and learn and grow together and pursue opportunities. And for those that were around, I know the next topic on the agenda is Artesian, and we had an Artesian Leadership Committee when that property was open, where community members came and offered ideas, and that helped shape decisions. And we talked about kind of a similar format with the Armory, so that the members who are using it have a voice in how it evolves and grows.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
So I'd like to say again that it's great that a lot of the partners came out tonight. It's good to see you. It's also great to know that so many of these partnerships and so many of these organizations are connected to other people we know in the community. There is I could think of probably 8 people off the top of my mind that are connected to this, which is good for not just for the community but for growth and connecting with everyone else. But part of my question was kind of already answered, but I was thinking about the process for small spaces and for renting. Like, how long can they rent out a space? What is the kind of an understanding of what that process is? Because, let's say you have a couple people, that want to use a space, and they're not really, they're starting out, they're really just kind of getting their bylaws together and whatnot. I'm very curious about, how do they get to know what's available to them, and how long could they potentially rent a space?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'll be able to answer that specific question in almost nauseating accuracy when I have my business plan ready at the end of the year. But I will say that I can explain my method of how I'm developing that. We are under Parks, Arts, and Recreation, and we have a sister building, the Olympia Center, who has a reservation model. So we're looking at that. We're looking at other arts centers that we know of, like the Multnomah Arts Center and other organizations that have similar models, and seeing how they have their reservation systems set up. And I have done an analysis of reservable spaces in Olympia and Thurston County, and what their pricing structures look like and how they do that. And so all of that's going to get morphed into a reservation model. It will probably look a lot like the Olympia Center model, in the sense that classes and programs get scheduled, and then it gets released to the public in time intervals, and then people can reserve it online, or they can call a friendly desk person, and they will have a public service representative help them. And then, of course, I will have a staff at the Armory that people can call at any point in time with their questions or how to get involved, or they can just walk in, and hopefully, and whenever we're open, there will be somebody near the front door who would be able to receive them and answer their questions. Reservations, I don't think that I've seen a cap on how long you can reserve something, but I think we haven't talked about it. We have to kind of come up with the scope of it. But at some point, it's not a day reservation, it's longer term, and we'd have to build out different models for that. But that is something that we're working on, and that will be something you can see in the business plan later this year. Yeah, good question.
I do have another kind of a question about what we were talking about, the energy usage. Councilmember Cooper was talking about that. I've also heard a little bit from some folks about the concept of maybe doing like a micro power grid between a lot of the buildings that are there. I've heard that idea. Do you know anything about where we are with that, about the idea of it being, because there's a lot of public buildings that are really close to each other in a close vicinity, and using different buildings for solar, and kind of like that kind of districting.
Yeah. I'm not aware of those discussions, besides the fact that I'm working with Dr. Braff on being actively involved in any solar initiatives as a city. And Dr. Braff knows that I'm interested in the Armory being a participant in any initiatives that do happen. So I guess I've made myself available and made the Armory available for future discussions, but I haven't been brought to the table on any of those yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Dr. Braff is the city's climate programs director, for the record. This is just like a giant interconnected web of collaboration that I see. This is really exciting. I think when I think of all of the opportunities. I'm sure that you've already collaborated already amongst yourselves, but I just see an endless amount of opportunities. I'm sure there's ways that you're going to collaborate that all of us probably don't even realize just yet. So that's exciting. I guess my questions are more along the lines of making sure that we get more partners. It sounds like obviously in the culinary space there could be one, but how many more partners could you accommodate? What's your threshold?
We only have so much leasable space for long-term leases, but we've left a lot of additional open space to create opportunities for other types of partnership. So we will have, the leasable space is pretty set, and I would say that the current anchor partners have accommodated about 90% of the leasable space, long-term leasable space. That's not even 40% of the total square footage of the building, though. There's all these other spaces where we can work with the community to find out what the types of partnerships they'd like to see. And then those spaces we can build out the mechanisms so that they can take advantage of the available spaces. Yes.
Yeah, it's just one way this concept could, or example of how a concept could go is the drill hall. I don't know if it'll happen all in phase one, but eventually the hope is that it becomes, it could be used as a performance venue. So there, for example, could be a contract with an agency in town that does music events, and perhaps they use this space for a series of 10 music events over the course of the year. Different venues, for different size artists are really critical. So, I think that's an example of how, same thing could happen with the kitchen, which could be used. We have at the Olympia Center, we have the Olympia Salsa, who rents out one of the kitchens, and they do a lot of their prep work there, and then they sell the salsa at the farmer's market and Ralph's and Bayview and other places, I'm sure. And so I think there's lots of opportunities for more smaller incremental partnerships that maybe aren't like permanent lease-based, if that makes sense. And those are just a couple examples.
Yeah, and one last comment about partnerships. Our 8 current anchor partners collaborate themselves as well. They had a few minutes today to talk about what they do, but in the conversations I've had with them, they've all worked with each other and an infinite number of other organizations, and they will continue to do so. So the city has the spaces that are rentable, and we'll be able to rent and come up with partnership models there. But then each of these organizations has space and they already have a highly collaborative mindset, and they'll be bringing in other organizations and partners to their spaces for future collaboration as well.
That's great, thank you. And so where can those folks go to find more information about the available space?
Yes, they can contact me. And there's also an Engage page for the Armory, and we're going to be working over the next year to develop an official Armory webpage. Currently, the Engage page is where it is because we're still in our project phase until we enter into construction. But I'm available. I'm happy to chat with anybody who has inspirational ideas or questions or just wants to talk. I'm happy to have an appointment or talk on the phone or answer questions via email.
Great, thank you. And I guess I'm also thinking about engagement with the city's Arts Commission. We've seen a lot of great outdoor sculptures, and I just imagine I see that around the campus, and so any opportunities to lift up local artists for the campus is great. I'm also thinking about ways that you might try to show the community that you put on display those suggestions that they made and how they came to fruition in some visually appealing way. I don't know what that would look like. I'm not an artist. But I think to Mayor Pro Tem, her point about the community input that we solicited, it would be great if we could find a really creative way to show that we listened and that we took that and we we delivered in some way. And so that would be great to see. Yeah. Councilmember Vanderpool.
Tell us about the naming process and the possibility of changing the name.
Absolutely. Currently, the official name is the Olympia Armory. And there is an official process for renaming the building. We are in the initial steps of coming up with a schedule to have that named. It goes through the Parks, Arts, and Recreation park naming process. But we will be adding additional layers of community input as well as working with the Arts Commission and the Park Foundation or the Park Board.
Yeah, there's a formal process actually, but in the OMCs that outlines what we go through, and it'll involve some public outreach where we will reach out to organizations and members of the community and solicit ideas for a name. And then once we receive those, then there will be a process for narrowing those down and bringing those back through the advisory committees, including both. Well, this one, it's not in the OMC to go to the Arts Commission, but I think that would be a good process step for this project, and then also eventually through PrAC, and then inevitably it comes to council for the final decision on the official name. So that is a process. Typically with all park facilities, not just the Armory, but when we purchase them, there's usually what we call an interim name, and a lot of times with the Olympia Armory, it was already called that, so we just stuck with that. But like if you think about Yelm Highway, you know, that's not going to be Yelm Highway Community Park forever. That's just the name because that's the adjacent road. And so we have a lot of properties that we refer to based off the road. And then once they become developed, then we go through the formal naming process. And so one example where we did do a little bit different was with Rebecca Howard Park, where we named that one prior to doing construction, but most parks are named as the construction and development happens. And we'll be, as we get into later this year, we'll be starting that process. So you'll see and have the opportunity to engage in it.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
We could probably talk about this for a long time, but I guess I'll just comment that, it was an armory. And I certainly, I hope that we continue to tell that story. I think we'll probably still see armory on the building. I think part of that is really lovely and what it's going to turn into in 2026, right? And so I hear that you're doing all of this really important foundational infrastructure work and also looking forward to seeing how that'll evolve while still preserving the history of what it was, right? And how do we tell that story and not erase that? So thanks.
That was a point I was going to raise. Yeah. Good thing. Good point. Just thank you again. This is really exciting. Looking forward to it. But I did want to acknowledge that Bobby Williams is here from the Bridge Music Project, and I wanted to give Bobby an opportunity to talk about his organization. So if you want to come on up.
Absolutely. I'll bring up the slide for Bobby.
Well, I appreciate that, and my apologies for not being here sooner. I was fulfilling other commitments, but I'm thrilled to be here with everyone. My organization is the Bridge Music Project, and what we do is we use music, performance, education, songwriting, community. We teach youth how to use these as tools to deal with life's challenges. So primarily that's done through songwriting workshops where youth are working together to collaborate, to create original music. They record this music and perform it live. We also host audio engineering programs. Anyone can sign up for these programs, but we make a particular effort to include youth that aren't getting included in other projects. So we do targeted outreach to serve youth who have experienced incarceration, foster care, homelessness. So that's who we're working the hardest to serve. And beyond just being a fun, creative program, we see this as a way to build resilience, help youth develop life skills, and become healthy adults. So that's kind of the brief rundown, and we are just thrilled to be included in this project. We intend to host workshops there, continuous workshops. We plan to build a recording studio that youth can use on a consistent basis, and we just have a variety of programs that we're excited to get started and continue the programs that we're already doing in the community and other places we want to bring to the Armory. And we want to just help to help it become a welcoming environment to all the youth in our community.
Thank you very much, Bobby.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from council? All right. One last thing, along with the name change, the Armory campus is just outside the boundaries of our creative district. And so that's something that we might want to think about. And I kind of think it would be a little fun to think of the Armory as the capital of the creative district. So, all right. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So we will move on to item 2B, which is a discussion on the artesian market, which will be presented to us by Mike Reed, our Economic Development Director, to kick things off.
All right. So I'm Mike Reed. I'm your Economic Development Director, and you can introduce yourself.
I'm Daisha Versa, Economic Development Senior Program Specialist.
So you'll see in our presentation today, there's a very common color scheme going on with the previous presentation. And that's because the work that we're presenting to you tonight, we do under the banner of the Arts, Culture, and Heritage team that we have at the city. And so we still even have, yeah. And we also have Mary Grace here who's a member of our team. Natalie Koblenz, who's a partner out in the community that does work in this space. And Stephanie Johnson is another staff person. It's the coolest interdepartmental team that the city has going. We're gonna stamp that down right now. But it's fun because we're taking this team that has arts, culture, and heritage as some of its primary motivator, and the subject matter expertise that the staff bring to that space to solve some interesting and potentially complex challenges that we have. We have found ways to lean in to some of these challenges, and we're finding cool ways that we can address community needs and interests that align with our ethos as a community and move things forward. So I will just say this. I look at the products that this team has brought forward over the course of the last 4 years, 5 years that we've worked together, and it's been pretty impressive. So we're bringing forward tonight the next project that's coming out of the chute that will be an arch initiative, and that is an artesian market. So what we are talking about is I'll show you the map in a second, but what we're talking about is the property downtown, formerly known as the Artesian Commons. I will try to use that title as little as possible as I can tonight, and we'll explain why. But this is an arch project, as we've talked about. It is a creative district priority. So we were lucky enough to present to the CLIPS committee, was that last week? And went over some of the creative district work. Mayor, you just mentioned the Armory as the potential capital of the creative district. We are in a recertification process right now, and we are looking at expanding the boundaries to include the Armory. The project that we are talking about already is funded. So we are looking at a short-term pilot-like project, 3 to 5 years. We have $75,000 in the budget, and we've even already leveraged that to an additional $56,000 for some lighting improvements for this property. We approved that money in the 2023 budget. couldn't get to it last year due to some staffing capacities on the team, so we've carried that money over and we'll be doing it this year. The biggest thing, and we'll get into detail on this later, these are all sort of prompts for later pieces in the presentation, but I always think it's helpful, show people a little bit of the path that we're going to take them down and then walk them down all the way through the path. We're looking at a significant operating model change for this property. Previously, this was a park. We want to look at something vastly different than what a park would be. So with that, the property that we're talking about is really, it's the piece in the shaded in orange. That is the property that we think of when we thought of the Artesian Commons. Now, we do own everything outlined in this orange, so that is all city property. And there may be situations where we need to use some of this parking, which is publicly accessible parking, to support, but it'd be premature to know just how much and how that would work. So we are talking about activating this space. So one of the reasons, or here's why. That picture was taken just a couple of days ago. It was actually I think it was on Friday I took that picture. We have heard from you that this property is not working and we need to find a new alternative. We have heard from the community, this property is not working and we need to find a new alternative. We have also heard from you that vacant properties downtown are problematic, and I agree. And we talked about that at Clips. And one of the things that you can do, and we should be doing, is model the behavior that we want to see other property owners take. So this is our opportunity to be a leader in that space, take a piece of underutilized property, and find a way to activate it. We think about this property, it does have some unique challenges, so we are not talking about a long-term solution to this. We want potentially a short-term, faster activation than a redevelopment of the site. There is the artesian well on the site that development could even compromise, like multi-story development, theoretically may even compromise some of that well. So we are looking at surface uses, low cost, faster, and by faster I mean like 12 months fast, maybe 18. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Daisha. She's going to talk about the Creative District Strategic Plan and it as our guide.
All right, so a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is the convergence of a couple of streams. And Paul Simmons, in the previous business item, our Parks, Rec, and Arts Director brought up the fact that this particular property has already had a lot of community engagement process. And so there was a leadership committee that was developed in the previous iteration when it was the Artesian Commons. And so we have that thread, we have that history coming through, and that stream is converging with our Creative District Strategic Plan, which was another big community engagement lift that happened recently. So I'm going to go through 4 slides giving you kind of an overview. I know you've had a deeper dive presentation into the Creative District Strategic Plan, but I want to go through this overview and then talk about how that ties into this artesian market concept and how all of this comes together. So just a quick background on the Creative District Strategic Planning process. This was developed by a committee of 16 people, which included some city staff. It also included some community partners, and it included members of our creative district as well. This group of 16 people, in a process that ended officially in February of 2023, they went through this extensive community engagement where they sent out a survey, got 600 plus responses. They spent 10 hours doing stakeholder interviews. They did 7 listening sessions with 40 community members for a total of 658 people who gave their input, their ideas, their perspectives on what this creative district should be. And what came out of that was a really nice playbook to guide projects within the creative district. If you're not familiar with kind of the creative district, and the boundaries have already come up, it's a 30-block area that spans a lot of our downtown. And actually tonight after this, I'm submitting that recertification. So we're going to then be able to do some boundary looking at as well. I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide. I'm actually just going to read it. The Creative District Strategic Plan came up with a mission and vision. The vision is the Olympia Creative District features rich and diverse artistic and sensory experiences, engaging community members to develop creative endeavors. And the mission statement is we engage local artists and businesses in the development of a thriving creative economy and community that is anti-racist and anti-bigoted. This committee also, in the strategic planning process, came up with 5 different values that we can kind of think of as a constellation in guiding us as we navigate these creative district projects. So those 5 values are innovation, risk-taking, diversity, equity, and inclusion, autonomy, and community. And you'll see as we tackle any projects in the creative district that we're really holding up this constellation as what we're looking to as our guide. And then finally, the Creative District Strategic Plan gave us 5 goals. I'm not going to read through all of these with the details below, but I'm going to read through the main goal, and then I want to highlight 3 that really clearly and strongly tie in with this concept of an artesian market. So the committee, with all of their public engagement, they came up with build community, support, promotions, space, and access as the 5 goals of our strategic plan. And I know that was in the packet that's attached to this agenda as well, so you can go through and you can read not only this in detail, but also the strategic plan itself. It breaks all of these out into different initiatives and actions that can be taken as we approach our creative district. The 3 that I want to draw out as being really deeply tied in to the conversation around the artesian market is, first of all, community. So one of the things that we've learned in recent years about community, and particularly with the lockdowns and all of the time that followed after, is we really learned the importance of having spaces outside of home and outside of work where people can come together. So you'll hear that referred to by the term third spaces. And one of the things we learned when these third spaces were sort of taken away from us by the circumstances that we went through starting in 2020 was how crucial those are for community to be built, and also how much we miss them when they're gone. And so going back to that vacant spaces point that Mike brought up, when we have a space that could be used as a third space and we don't use it, we miss an opportunity to uphold a goal like this in the strategic plan. The next one that I want to highlight is just space itself. So one of the things that we've heard from our creative community is creativity takes a lot of different kinds of spaces. You need practice spaces, you need making spaces, you need galleries, you need performance spaces. And a key one that our community really has uplifted for us is that we need affordable places where we can bring our products to market. And so that obviously just fits like right in with the artesian space and the idea of an artesian market. And then finally, access. The strategic plan calls out a couple of different kinds of access specifically. So they talk about ADA access, making sure that people with disabilities can fully engage in, participate in this creative district as a whole. They also talk about economic access, so making sure that no one is excluded because they don't have the resources to sign an expensive long-term lease, that people can really participate in this low barrier way in the creative marketplace. So that was all the sort of theory or abstract concept behind it. What could this look like in practice? The 3 photos on this slide, in the top left corner, we have the Tacoma Night Market. It's not actually in the space that's up there right now anymore, but it's a long-standing night market that has been a really positive experience for the Tacoma community. So it's an active place. People are going, people are loving it, people are engaging with this space. Below that, you have the Lacey Food Truck Depot. This came, I think this effort was started in 2021. Lacey's Economic Development Department led that, specifically the Economic Development Coordinator, Wesley Nguyen. And I remember working with him just as a friend and a thought partner before I was with the city, before I was working in economic development, as he was working on this particular project, and how his whole thing was about that value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that entrepreneurs have that low barrier, affordable access to bring, in his case, food trucks, but also there's some other makers that are involved in that as well. And those efforts were recently recognized statewide. So the Washington Economic Development Association awarded Lacey just a couple of months ago with an award for diversity, equity, and inclusion in economic development for their efforts. And then top right corner, and thank you, Natalie, for sticking around. You see Natalie's work, some light art from a local artist. And that top right corner is kind of proof of concept for what we have been able to do here. So taking streets that are normally used for one purpose, transforming them into something else, and a place for the community to come together, specifically at night and specifically around light, which is the final slide that I'm going to present to you. So what we're thinking for this space, and I'm actually going to take a little bit of credit for something here, because I'm a mom of 3 teenage boys who do not appreciate how punny I am. We were having a discussion as a team. Natalie had brought this concept to us of what if we had these big light panels, these big 6x3 LED panels that are not just utilitarian, but they're beautiful, they're artistic, they're creative, and they're very Olympia. What could we do with something like that downtown? And so our team was getting together. We were talking about specifically seeking some funding from the Washington State Arts Commission. We're wondering, is there a way that we can take this concept that Natalie had brought to us and join it with some funding specifically for the creative district? And we were talking about maybe this artesian market being the space. And I said, are we talking about a night market or are we talking about a light market? For the record, for my kids, that idea took off. And that's been something we continue to go back to as being really important, having this lighting. When we know that we've got this kind of, Mary Grace has talked about, on our team, has talked about the artesian space as like a missing tooth in the creative district smile, right? And so we've got this gap, this space that if you go down there at night, it's a dark spot. And how do you take a spot like that and make it somewhere that people want to go to at night? How do you bring a sense of warmth, welcome, and community in its light? And so that's the concept that we're looking at right now. We do have that funding, not just for the lighting, but for other site improvements to make that space into something welcoming. I think it's your turn, Mike.
Okay. I will just add, sorry. I will add, we have learned an incredibly powerful story about what light can do for our downtown. We get more compliments about the alley string lighting, or when we've seen Natalie and her team and Dave Setterberg do something unique and different, like this lighting up of the building behind you can kind of see, or even just this zigzag lighting. It does draw people in. And on the top left there, that's when we lit up, or Natalie and team lit up City Hall. It tells a powerful, powerful story. So
I forgot something else I wanted to say about this. Talking about those two streams converging, where you have that history and that previous process with this space and our current strategic plan, one of the things I discovered as I was doing my research coming into the city in December was that this idea of lighting, and not just utilitarian lighting, but artistic, aesthetically pleasing lighting for this space in particular, was identified in 2013. So 11 years ago, people were saying, you know what we need for this space? We need lighting, so.
So what are we looking for? And how do we want to do this? What's this, when I preface the idea, we're looking at a different model on this one. This property should not be a park again. Not the way that we're talking about it. We tried to bring this forward. Parks did an incredible job trying to adapt and change over and over again. And there was just something that went wrong and it did not work. And maybe it's the location, who knows? What we're looking at is an operator model, and we have a great track record in this kind of work. So 3 examples where we own the infrastructure, and then we go find somebody who can be an operator to operate that space. We've done it with the Children's Museum, city-owned building. Farmers Market, city-owned building. Washington Center, city-owned building. We find somebody that knows how to do this. They can set the standards, they set the behavior, they set the price, it is a business enterprise for them. We are offering our infrastructure because it's meeting a goal of ours. These were all examples of something that our community said that they wanted and that they valued and that could bring a return to our community. So our goal is we're going to go look for an ideal operator for this space. We are seeing night market and various market operators starting to emerge just in the private sector out there. As mentioned, there's the Tacoma night market was one. We've seen a number of local instances at the various summer fests, the Lovely Summerfest and Winterfest. There's been night markets that have been put on at those events. So we actually do believe that out there are entities, and maybe even it's somebody that was associated with the previous conversation about the Armory and how could we tie those two together. We're going to look for somebody that has some demonstrable experience, a clear vision of how to execute. We want them to have the same sense of excitement that we have about this project. They need to be able to articulate and align with that creative district mission, vision, and values. We're going to want to see them have the organizational capacity. If we're going to lease them space, they are going to have to meet our insurance requirements. They are going to have to meet some financial wherewithal to be able to execute on this. And again, but we are not looking for a long-term commitment. The site, we have a $75,000 budget. That isn't a big enough budget to do all the necessary infrastructure for a long-term deal. We are imagining that $75,000 goes for new fences, maybe some temporary overhead sail things that can provide some cover, light touch improvements to that space. And then we've got the grant dollars that can associate with the lighting improvements that we're talking about. So here's the items that I think we are going to need to reach that successful outcome.
I'll just touch on the first 2 and then let Mike take the rest. So I've already talked about the Creative District Strategic Plan, and so having some kind of guidebook that has that history of community engagement and input is really an important piece of success here. And then the other piece, which we've touched on off and on throughout this, is this place needs a different story, right? And not a story that erases or diminishes all of the work, both on the behalf of city staff and community members who supported that original visioning or that earlier visioning of this space. But we also know that there's challenges, there's hard parts of that story, there's difficulties involved in that story. And so having had this time to kind of settle and heal with time And then figuring out what's the next story is going to be part of this. And so that's one reason we're kind of, we're looking at this idea of artesian commons, and this is something that's come up in a lot of conversations that we've had as we've been engaging with researching and planning, is this need to figure out what the next story is for this space, which we believe starts with a name.
We will also need a significant amount of just internal buy-in. We can't do this one ourselves, and even Arch as a team can't do it itself. This property has touched a lot of internal departments, and moving forward, it will continue to. So some of our first phases in this is doing some of that internal work. It's one of the reasons why we are not presenting to you a definitive timeline, because we need to reach out to some of the internal partners to understand some of their capacity and ability to help, and when and what that looks like. We know we're going to be interfacing obviously with parks, but parking, facilities, anytime you're a landlord and you've got a tenant there, things go wrong on the site, it's facilities that ends up having to carry that load. So understanding what that looks like on their part. And I'm glad to see OPD here as well, because they have some history with this space and we will want to incorporate them. I think a lot of this too is we have heard from the community two things. Sometimes they don't feel safe downtown at night. And we're also hearing sort of new is we need more nightlife that is beyond just bars. And so I would love OPD's involvement when it comes to SEPTED and creating that sense of space and safety in a core spot of our downtown, and what does that look like. Another thing, we would like this to be assigned to CLIPS if it needs intermediary touches throughout the process. So just knowing we've got a committee to go to, if we need a step in the process, we're requesting that, as opposed to scheduling all councils or subcommittees or things of that nature. It's just a little bit faster. As I mentioned before, this buy-in on the operating model that we're proposing here is going to be necessary. So that farmers market or children's museum model is what we're looking at. And with that, I need there to be an understanding in this. Operator in that model, they have to be able to make money. This isn't, so they're either charging vendors for their space, or they're charging an entry fee at times, or there's special events or programming that there could be tickets. So we are not imagining that this is a free all the time sort of scenario. Otherwise, an operator doesn't have a mechanism to cover their costs. And if we're going to be looking at an operator that isn't us, they have to find a mechanism to cover their costs. I don't know what all those cost models will be. But that's what that looks like. So I just wanted to preemptively place that there. And then, again, as the reminder, this isn't a long-term fix. We may find out after testing it, this is perfect. It says it's farmers market 2.0, and it may not work. But it's our responsibility now to go test and try. We are on a smaller budget that has now been supported by a grant. I think we can do some unique, cool things there and meet some objectives. So with that, we are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Mike and Daisha. Wow, there's a lot of interest here. One moment. I just wanted to say, Daisha, on your question about the name, why do you need to choose? Why not both? Nightlight market.
Maybe we don't.
Yeah, I like it. All right, so why don't I just go on down the line here? So beginning with Mayor Pro Tem.
I do think we should choose, keep it simple. But I do appreciate that. Okay, so I have 4 words. And a little bit being cheeky, but also I wonder if we'd get any interest from the organizers of the current Oli night market and see if they might want to come to Olympia to have their night market. Maybe. I won't take up too much of your time, I really enjoyed your presentation to the CLIPS, or the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee, and I see that you and you tailored it a little bit differently tonight. So yeah, so we appreciate that. And also you have a slide up there with the previous outreach, and there's so much attention to detail on that one. They had, the first one is like 606 unique responses to the survey, and then you have all these little people that are 101 each. And I was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyways, but lots of intentionality. This is clearly a great team, even for a new team. But I do have a question and kind of a suggestion. But, you had a list of kind of qualities for an ideal operator. So I get that we're hopeful that we'll find someone, and we also don't want it to, box them in too much. I also do hope that there is some sort of a local tie-in, other than they're just going to be here in Olympia generating, sales tax that will, actually go to us. But still, even if the organizer, the operator isn't from Olympia, it'd be great if they're, from the county area, or if they do have vendors, and they'd prioritize vendors from Olympia, but something, as local as we can, right? Without boxing folks in too much. I think that's really important. The 3 to 5 year commitment, I guess we would, if we had a lot of interest, or if it was going really well, then, we might consider extending that, of course. So I guess we won't go down to that too much, but I'm really excited. Thank you.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
Yeah, I'm going to reach into my Dutch heritage and say that there's the concept of the outdoor living room space, which is kind of like when you live in a city and you don't have very big apartments, or you don't have a lot of other spaces. You have that third place that is like an outdoor living room, right? And so with that said, I'm more inclined to support a farmer's market situation where the it's paid through the vendors rather than a ticket to enter type of situation. But I'm also interested in how are we going to do this seasonally? How are we going to do this hourly? Right? We have a fence that's currently set up. Some of the public would be concerned about the fence going down, right? And a situation kind of getting out of hand, right? But I do want it to be an active space, right? We want it to be active as many hours as it can be, right? But I'm very curious about the strategy of how do we open this? How do we close it? Is there going to be 2 entrances? If the more, you're talking about building a space where you have activity, that is going on as much as possible so that there is enough eyes on the street, that there is enough people there. But I can always see there's always a downtime, right? There's a time when there's no one there. So I'm very curious about your strategy about that. And during the winter, when it rains, like during the summer, nighttime, we can have a lot of people there, but we have different climate, we have different things, and we have a very small budget for roofing it or whatever. So I'm very curious about the logistics of how this would operate in your mind.
I think on that one, I am doing my best to not want to do the business planning for who may be the better business planner as someone who's the operator. And I think that is one of the challenges when we go with that operator model is I think it's great in the sense that you're going to get somebody with subject matter expertise in that space, but in doing so, you have to relinquish some control to them. And that's, so I don't know the answer. I think that those are the kinds of questions as we are looking for operators to sort of understand and even share some observed realities that we have. That if it's not locked up and potentially not accessible when it's not open, people will find their way into it, and that's not the intent of the space. And so I look at, how the farmers market manages their space. It is technically public. It's a publicly owned building, but they do have rules about what trespass looks like and when that occurs and when and what they want that to be enforced like. Same with the Children's Museum and their grounds around there as well. So I think on those kinds of questions, it is early, but I do hear you. I also really like the idea, and I think as we are looking for potential operators for that space, somebody that brings forward a vision for more activation is better. I mean, everybody around there wants more. Be open more, have more programming, have more opportunities. So absolutely, the businesses across the street would absolutely want to see more opportunity, but they also don't want competition. So that's why we are not talking about a food truck depot like what Lacey has done. We want something that supports the existing downtown community and doesn't sort of compete with it. So hopefully that gives some thought to the questions.
Kind of as a follow-up, I'd be definitely interested in maybe a time shift model where you have different times scheduled. It's hard to move tenants in and out like that, but if you have an evening night market, but then in the morning it's used for like a little coffee stand or something. You know what I mean? Not to be too competitive against all the coffee houses we have, but just saying, kind of a thing at different times, operations. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking that the gate and the fencing around the museum is exactly what I picture for something like that. It's a little nicer, but it's and you can still looks like you can see through it, type of thing, and yet it's closed off when it's not operational. Councilmember Madrone.
I'll laugh at any pun you want to throw at us. And there's a lot here. Night market goes to light market, and then nightlife turns into nightlight. Like there's a lot to work with here. I had a similar thought as Mayor Pro Tem Huen in terms of as local as possible, in terms of an operator. And the reason I say that is because of the relationships that come with it. And I think that this place is just going to need somebody who's a good relationship maker, whether or not they have those existing now. But when I think about what is experience that somebody can demonstrate that they're going to do some creative, funky thing in this creative, funky space that we have. And that really could be a whole range of skills there. So I would encourage you to not think too hard about what it looks like for somebody to be an operator in this space. Because it could come about in many different ways, and there's many transferable skills, as they say. But I think one of the really key ones would be somebody who is very good at building and maintaining relationships, especially since that is it's kind of a locked-in area there. There's a lot of other businesses there. There's a street right there. There's the artesian well there. And one thing that I noted in my notes here was, what does access to the well look like while something is being operated in that space? So just some things to think about. It sounds like you want to keep it pretty wide open to see what kind of ideas people want to pitch into the space. And I think that's a great idea. One thing I was a little confused about, are you trying to find an operator who's going to upfront agree to 3 to 5 years in that space? Or is it just for 3 to 5 years, we're going to explore what can happen here?
Ideally, I think we'd like to try to find one operator who's willing to make a 3-year to 5-year commitment, because we do have some funds, $75,000, to do some degree of improvements. I want to make sure that before any improvements are made, we're working with who that operator would be. I don't want someone saying, this is the way you should lay it out, here's access points, and then they're gone 6 months later. Now, those things can happen, but ideally we are looking for that kind of relationship, that the the investments that we're making are intentional and have some degree of extended life. So, do you have thoughts?
Okay. And I'm curious, too, a couple things that that I think about in terms of like a regular thing that's happening downtown is like, what's the frequency of it? Like, what's the seasonality of it? Of course, I think those are things that you should keep open, but we've got the farmers market that runs, like, they've expanded the days that they run because they're so popular. But I've also seen other markets that try to do something like every single week, and then like the shine kind of wears off. The light fades a little bit. Yeah, I'm just kind of voicing some thoughts here. It's nothing that I think you need to shape your concept around. But I am curious about like what a lease would look like for that space, and like would an operator be actually renting that space from the city at a discounted rate? Like what are you thinking in terms of creating the incentive for somebody to want to come and try to figure out how to make this space work?
So we don't have all of those details down yet. I would say those are coming. A few things that we have talked about, though, one thing we're trying to do as we think about developing even the RFP, which would then lead into the lease, like figuring out how to select, how to find that person, is we're talking a lot about trade-offs. And so we're talking about both the profitability and the community benefits. And one idea that we've had, and again, like this is super early stage, is the idea of some kind of impact covenants or incentivizing like what we want to see, but also providing some flexibility there. So I don't know if that actually applies to city contracts. I'm coming at this from impact investing background, but one of the things that we look at is how do you structure a deal to incentivize the behavior that you want to see while being a good trusted partner with some flexibility. And so I think there's some things we can draw on as we go into that planning process that will allow us to find the person, make those trade-offs in the right way that works for everybody.
Yeah, I would also add, and typically, you wouldn't say things like this before a negotiation ever starts, but I think that there's a dose of reality that we have to have. We've got a very specific use that we have in mind with a piece of property that has some challenges. I don't think that we're talking, we are not in the high ground of a negotiation standpoint to get a lot of money out of a deal like this. There's not a deep market value from a renting this piece of property for this very specific use. We might be able to articulate something, but just as a plain market-based transaction, if I was a private property owner and I went out to a broker and said, hey, find me somebody who's willing to pay me to use this piece of property for this one very specific use that I'm okay with, you'd probably be on the market for a really long time. So I think that there's some realities that we have to have in what we would be looking for in a transaction. But I do think we do need a transactional document in place. I do think it would be most likely something that would look like a ground lease or a space lease in that kind of a space where we are a landlord. What they pay for rent, it's going to be those trade-offs that, I think that if they can articulate a high degree of community benefit, that they're serving some of the populations that we want them to serve and meeting some of those needs and achieving this high component of local use, and if they're achieving a certain amount of programming with the space to keep it active, those are all the things that I sort of think about as going into a negotiation like that.
Okay,
So
that all sounds good. But it's on the record here. We're not on the high ground in this negotiation.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all that. And like, anything we can do to incentivize use in that space. And then I want, and then at a certain point you have to, articulate what's the public benefit to that, for city-owned property and stuff like that. But I'm really, really glad that you all are working on this, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. And I do think we need more fun things to do downtown that don't revolve around, alcohol. So I think this is a good direction to be headed.
Yes. Councilmember Gilman.
A good direction to be headed? Okay. All right, just clarifying. All right. So I have just a couple of reactions, and I don't take it as backseat driving. As I'm listening to the conversation, I was thinking about the mayor's reference earlier to the grounds around the Armory and the potential for plinths, and I'm thinking, I love the idea of claiming the space with light, but I also think we have a lot of beautiful public art that's not on display. And the potential of having sort of sculpture garden that's beautifully lit as a way to both take up some of the space during times when it's not active with vendors and to make it something special that we all take care of. And I think considering having it be visually attractive, that you'd stop and look at it when it's not full of vendors, could help to protect the space. And, I understand the suggestion of having a good place that's not based on alcohol, and I'm also thinking that beer gardens subsidize our community festivals, they subsidize vendors at craft markets, and so there's this tension. I've visited the Container Mall in Vegas a couple of times, and it's definitely the little amphitheater in the center that sells beer and has a live band is what allows the pop-up vendors to be all around. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to rent the land to do it. So I don't know what the right answer is to that, and I don't know what kinds of costs we need to recover I guess, so that's one specific question I have is, why do we have a private vendor paying us a lease? What costs or what liabilities? What are we trying to cover by having somebody make money from this?
Is that what are we trying to?
I mean, you said we're not in a favorable position, but
yeah.
What are the costs? What are the city's costs or the city's obligations that we're trying to recover by leasing the space?
I don't think that we're trying to recover any financial costs, to be honest with you.
Well, then we could make a pretty affordable lease.
Yes, we should. I think that if we are to try to recover any costs with this, it would be associated with any expense maybe that facilities may have, and that's why you're looking at a really low-touch degree of a site improvement, so that there isn't a significant amount of cost to recoup. So that would be the model that I would look to recommend, and we'd work with legal to understand, what and how we can offer that. So.
Thank you. And then my one other reaction is that we have a one-hole Portland loop to serve that space. And we have, you can look at our bathrooms in downtown map. We have no other public restrooms at this end of downtown. Unlike hands-on Children's Museum, Port Plaza, Percival Landing, the Farmers Market, they each have multiple stall restroom buildings. So I wouldn't want us to compromise the restroom standard for the number of people in a venue. And I think that's going to be a more expensive challenge, whether it's portable restrooms that are on a monthly rental or it's actually, hard plumbing in some facilities. That to me is the big cost of making this a more active space.
It's, You hit the nail on the head in one of the areas that we've been thinking about as a potential spot that will need some work. And it is restroom facilities and specifically the Portland Loo and its proximity to the site. So we don't have an answer for that at this point in time. I do think that that's where working with the neighbors, that is, the bars and restaurants that are around there, that if they buy into this, maybe there's some support in, trying to move people in and out of theirs, but also the idea of temporary facilities for larger events. You could look at that. So no immediate answer, but we know that that is one definite spot that any operator is going to quickly identify that, hey, something's going to have to happen here. So.
And then one last comment. I wanted to underscore Councilmember Vanderpool's interest in it being sort of a community living room, that I would rather that people were excluded by behavior, but not excluded by their ability to pay or appearance, that it is a community space. While it's not a park, it's still a plaza that I hope everybody's welcome to, as long as they don't break the social contract, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Councilmember Parsley.
I think listening to my council mates, and I do like Light Market. I'm sorry, it's simple. It's very good. But I grew up with, Light Brights. Anyways, it just, all my council mates are kind of summarizing what I've been thinking. And it kind of goes to, believe it or not, the Boulevard RFP process. We worked that, we figured it out, and look what we got. We got this amazing project with Habitat for Humanity. So I'm looking at what you all have to do internally and otherwise is work on this RFP. What does this look like for operational model, encompassing a lot of things that we're talking about? I think that's where the process, is your selection process for this model, is going to become key in my mind. I heard local. I love that. I do like experience, though, because if we're going to do this, we're going to need to have someone who comes in with the understanding that this space could get out of hand. We've seen that happen already with this space. And how do we prevent that? How do we make it a living room, yet allow the operational person to survive? They've got to pay salaries. They've got to pay overhead. So there has to be a mechanism for that as well. And by doing an operational model, which I appreciate, it relieves us from having to do this process in a space that could easily turn, and we've seen that, not healthy. And the rebranding, I think, is fantastic, because I think if you ask a lot of us that were here when all this came down, and some of the community members, including the businesses around there, there's a bit of trauma that we have to figure out how to get over and beyond in this space. And if it's going to be more than just nighttime, I don't really know if anyone here remembers how hot that space got. I mean, blistering hot in the middle of summer. So there has to be some way to protect the people that are there and make it more habitable. But I would just say, absolutely, work on the selection process. I think you're hearing what the council is saying on this. And I think it's a great idea to take the community livability. I think instead of taking it to all the different subcommittees, I think one makes it faster for you guys. And I would highly recommend that as you work your way through what this process will look like for selecting and entertaining people, that you bring it back to them, because I think they're hearing us as well, what we're all saying. And I love the idea of art in the day as well as night when it's not being used, maybe lit up beautifully so we can protect it. And I personally don't have a problem with a very decorative, nice fence to keep it that way.
Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. I appreciate you bringing us a vision so we can move on from the trauma that is the Artesian Commons. I said it. Let that be the last time it's said. because I think, like, let's stop dwelling on it and let's take this vision and move forward. I think that's how we get to it. I don't think that it's the same world that we tried to design that park for. And a lot has changed. And so when you're talking, I'm thinking of my favorite night market, which is on Frenchman Street in New Orleans. And the twinkling, like I can see the lights and I can feel the hustle and the bustle of people just by saying it out loud. Like my hair stands up on the back of my neck. It's amazing. I want to buy something at every booth. And in New Orleans, they have cultural districts. And so in New Orleans, local art festivals and markets are sales tax exempt. And when we're talking about our creative district, I do start wondering if we would have the power to have local art and local festivals have some sort of sales tax exemption in this space that's supposed to be for creating. And if not, let's ask the legislature to put that in the creative district model. I think you have to take better promotional photos, Mike. I mean, I'm sorry, so I'm thinking, I just want to say that as a joke, because what I'm immediately thinking about is the staging of this site for the promotional photos to make somebody want to respond to the RFP. Right, so can we get the twinkly installed and get some light panels? And he's gonna make me let him respond before I keep going, so I'll stop and pause
That
there.
picture was intentional to evoke that emotion specifically. So I took that, I talked to her about, hey, should I use this one? It's pretty bleak and dystopian.
Right.
And the answer is, yeah, we have to change.
Right.
That's, when people look at that space, that's what they see and that's what they feel. And that's what we're trying to change.
Right.
So that will be the last time we use that kind of a photo to tell that story. But that's why we chose it.
Cool, and I hope very soon that the chain link and the weeds are gone, so that we can start visioning what could be next. I'm thinking about like contracting kind of stuff, like around the hours and the activity. I agree with Robert. Like the more use we can get out of it within reason and within somebody's ability to do a good job, I like that. A lot of markets start with Wednesday, and a lot of markets never move beyond Wednesday, right? Like it's just that we need to have some flexibility to make sure it's the right growth into the space. I started thinking about a concession lease and not a ground lease. So like I don't know if we have this at the market, but there's some sort of percentage of total sales situation rather than paying for the property. And so, like, to me, that's the way I would think about it, with an allowance for getting your business up and running and whatever that threshold in their business plan is. And then, maybe if they're doing great, that triggers some cost sharing with the city. Like that's kind of how I thought about it. I also think that $75,000 won't build the fence that people talked about.
No.
I remember what that black fence cost. It was more than that. And so I actually want to go to what Robert said too. Like we need to think a little bit longer term. I think, or be open to a longer term approach. If we think about a 5-year lease, what kind of tenant improvements would we accommodate for in a structure that maybe would get paid back through some sort of concession or ground lease over time? If we have the right partner that is bringing some, ability to pay a lease, I would want to consider whether we could make some additional and different tenant improvements, either in the beginning or in phases with success, up to and including the beautiful fencing that the mayor talked about. And honestly, I would put in the CFP for next year a roof on that property. If we build a beautiful roof on that property, it will be successful.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the difference between our community and other places in the world and in the South that can do more nighttime outdoor stuff. Is like it rains here through the 4th of July and maybe through Labor Day, right?
Maybe all year.
Right. And white pop-up tents mess up the lighting, right? Like, so if we could make that investment, the light market would come to life. So I know that's more than the city manager wanted to spend today, but that's where my mind leaps in this conversation. We're not gonna build on it. We're not gonna put cars back on it. We're not gonna put a park back there again. So let's go big.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
So I'm starting to think of the logistics of equipment and the tents or however we go about it, right? So my question is, how much of this is going to be permanent infrastructure, like permanent tabling that can't be moved, right? How much of this is stuff that a tenant would have to get it from a storage unit from us, right? I'm thinking of staff hours. I'm thinking of the logistics of setting up and taking down things, right? I'm very curious your thoughts on that. It's a little early, but I'm very curious. I'm also thinking about a fence. If anyone's ever been to Disney, they know that when there's a new attraction, they put up a little wall and they put a window and it says, take a peek into what's coming up. I don't know. I kind of dig that. That's a cool little vibe. I even like a. It's like putting up the butcher paper. Putting a fence up and then having flowers or something that is just welcoming, even as a wall that's welcoming, right? In a way. So, but yeah, I'm very curious about what you think about the logistics of.
I like the idea of anything that helps build positive excitement for a space that has long been looked at with frustration. So anything that can be done to build that curiosity and positivity and excitement, I think, should be explored. Especially if we can accomplish that at a lower cost. As to the first question about the kinds of infrastructure and the mobility and movability, and I don't know what the answer to that would be. I think that part of that is dependent upon kind of what Councilmember Cooper was talking about. How long of a window are we talking about on this space being used, and who is making that investment? So if you are doing a deal with someone and they only have 3 years to recoup their costs, they're going to buy lower grade, lower cost things. So they will be pop-up tents, and they will be lower cost furniture that is lighter weight and probably less durable. If it's a longer term transaction and they feel confident that there's a proof of concept there that they feel that they can invest into, or that we feel like we can invest into, you get a better quality. You could have, I love Councilmember Gilman's awareness of the cargo container market in Las Vegas. That is, I think, one of the premier concepts where you've seen this kind of work. You're taking what was a lower cost, it started off as a lower cost model, but they made it cool. I think all of those things are in play, but we don't know yet the vision of how to execute this. So part of it is going out with inspiration and concept and seeing who knows how to execute what they come back and tell us. And they may come back and tell us $75,000 isn't enough. I can't make money off of a site like this. They may tell us it needs a roof. They may tell, we don't know. So part of this is to go out and test. But we are testing intentionally. We are testing with a lower cost, shorter term, because that's kind of the state that we are in. And I do think it's a little bit of proof of concept. And if that proof of concept works, and we did it in a quicker, cheaper, faster sort of model, and it works, then I think we start looking at how we can make some of these longer term investments to keep it there and functional. So,
Councilmember Parsley.
That was going to, listening to my council mates, these are all great ideas. two thoughts. One is if the 75,000 plus 56 is just not going to get you there, would it be wrong to do a one-year pilot with somebody to explore the idea of what the city would have to put into this financially as well as the partner? It's just an idea. The other, I mean, it goes to the selection process again. But the other idea is it possible while you're working through what you're seeking in your operator, what might be the extremes the city needs to put into it? 75,000 all the way to 500,000? Because I remember what the cost of the Portland Loo was. So, and a roof and a fence, you could start adding up, but it would be good to, at least to know what we could be looking at. And we don't have to buy that all in 1 year, Jay, I promise. But it would be nice to know what it could be in 3, 5, 10 years. It would be an interesting exercise for the council, I think.
Sure. City Manager Bernie.
I'm not going to put any roadblocks in the way of this idea. This is a great idea. I think as I've heard the conversation, there's kind of where we start and where we get to, what we aspire to. And what I've heard Mike and Dacia say a lot of is we don't know until we can find an operator, right, that can give us a proof of concept. And it may start as the white pop-up canopies as a proof of concept. And if the night market in that format takes off, then maybe plan B is, well, now let's put the roof over it, right, so that it can be more sustainable in the long run. But they might need, an operator might want to proof that concept, but first before they ask us to invest. And so I think we'll learn a lot more about the range of costs of what it might take once they identify an operator and we get maybe even a season under us of learning and about how it operates. And so I would just maybe ask to give Mike and Dacia as much flexibility as they can to kind of get something launched and then come back to you with what they learn and figure out what that looks like moving forward with better cost estimates.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I think much of what's been said, I concur with most of it, although the name thing, I'm still, yeah. But no, I'm also I'm really thinking about the community aspect of this space, and obviously one of those things is access to the well. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of think of it in the same way as our exclusive negotiation agreement with Island Enterprises when it comes to the Japanese garden. You know, we have that as a condition, and I feel very similar about access to the well. Although not right now, but in the future. I think that there should be a clear path for access to that without obstruction, and I think that's important. I do think that obviously that space needs some beautification, but I think investing too much money into beautification of the site, frankly, without knowing what type of activity we will draw is not, I would say, fiscally responsible, at least to jump into something that is perhaps just not sustainable long term. So although I mentioned the fence, I also could see where that could possibly be destroyed. Frankly, and we have to think creatively about how we want to maybe close off that space so that it seems accessible, but also figure out a way to make it warm and inviting. And I think art is a wonderful way to do that, as Councilmember Gilman pointed out earlier. And I think that folks are more likely to care for the site. Especially if it's a site that is decorated from the community and by the community in a positive way. So yeah, that's how I see that. I'm not too concerned yet with your proposals. I think, as the city manager said, in terms of allowing flexibility for the operators is important. Let's see what they can do, because right now it's nothing. So I think that's better than what we've got going on now. And so, yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm excited to see this come forward. I look forward to it coming to Clips in the future. Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I've been sitting with this like 3 to 5 years timeline and just hearing about like, oh, we could invest more in the space if it shows like over time that it's going to work. It makes me wonder if we shouldn't say something like, 2 years, but then also caveat that with saying that the city is willing to like invest more in infrastructure as we see how things come along, so that folks know that we're interested in a longer term arrangement, and we're interested in investing in a successful longer term arrangement, and we want to know what's going to work. So do with that what you will. And I also just, since I keep hearing the mayor over here grumble over these puns, if we're going to have a night market, we're going to need a night mayor.
Overtime? I'm down. Councilmember Vanderpool. All right, it's getting late. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
I don't know what that means. For the nightmare. Okay, that sounds like someone that's been sending hate mail to the city council e-box. Anyway, no, but through the end of this discussion, it's we had talked about this when you brought it to Clips and how important and passionate the community feels about this project, and so we sort of don't want to kind of open the floodgates to anything. When it is time for cleanup, when it is time for a name, I feel like the operator would probably want to have a say in that, but is there ways to involve the community? Can we do some sort of like a cleanup day? Can we survey it out to folks? Can we, if we're doing some painting, can we involve community artists? What's a way for folks that have been asking for this space to be open again to be a part of opening it again? So.
I have a little bit of a response to that. Just something that this whole conversation is making me think of is feedback that I've had recently on our creative district strategy or implementation in general, is that our creative community really wants to give input. And as I'm hearing all of these concerns about cost and how exactly does that work, something that came to my mind immediately is I didn't grow up in this country, and so I've had like a lot of time in places where people didn't have a lot of resources. And one thing that I've seen over and over again, and specifically around markets, is how when you don't have a lot of resources and you have that creative capacity in your community, it can totally be leveraged. And so something this is making me think of immediately is to tie this back into the rest of our creative district work and the artists and the creatives in our community that are already working with us, and see, like, I think there's some problem solving there, and I think there's some creativity there as well. And so that's the immediate thing that comes to mind when you're asking how to involve the community, although I think it's much more than that.
Any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Thank you both very much. All right, so before we move on at this time, because we're anticipating that the next presentation is going to be roughly about 40 minutes, we are going to take a 5-minute recess. It is now 8:11. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is item 2C, which is the Olympia Police Department Strategic Plan and Comprehensive Study Update. And here this evening to present to us is our Rich Allen, the city's Chief of Police, Sam Costello, the Deputy Chief of the Olympia Police Department, and Shelby Parker, also Deputy Chief of the Olympia Police Department.
Thank you, Mayor. For the record, Rich Allen, Police Chief. And yes, tonight we're going to be talking about our OPD strategic plan and our comprehensive department analysis. As I'm talking about this comprehensive department analysis started off as a staffing study, and it kind of morphed into a more broader look at all of our operations. So if I say the word staffing study instead of comprehensive analysis, that's what I mean. It's one and the same thing, but I often say staffing study just to shorten it up a little bit. So let's get going. So tonight, one of our priorities when we started our strategic plan work and our staffing study was we wanted to make sure we were in line with all the other plans that the city has, whether it be the reimagining recommendations, the city's comp plan. Deputy Chief Costello has been involved in the community oversight of law enforcement. We really wanted to make sure we were keeping all of the city initiatives in mind as we were going through this plan. So the first thing we're going to do is talk briefly about how our plans are going to touch reimagining and the city's comp plan. And then I'll start talking about our strategic plan work that we did, the staffing study work that we did, talk a little bit about an implementation strategy for both, and then some funding options of how to pay for the additional staffing that is being recommended. And then we'll wrap it up with kind of how we're going to track how we're doing, how we're going to track our progress. So to start it off, I just want to do a brief recap of the things that we've really already done with reimagining, and this is just a snapshot. It's something that I shared with the Social Justice and Equity Committee the last time I was in front of them. So we started with a new mission, vision, and values back in June of '23. Tonight we're talking about our staffing study or our comprehensive department analysis, our 5-year strategic plan. Our body cameras are fully implemented, and that was accomplished well over a year ago. Our in-car video, it says underway. I'm going to kind of move the goalpost a little bit and say we're there. A couple of our cars have some wiring issues in them, and we're still trying to figure out how to make that work. The cameras are installed, but somehow the wires aren't working the way they're supposed to. But that's only a couple of cars that we're working on those. One of the recommendations in reimagining was talking about employee wellness, because we all recognize that if employees feel like they're being taken care of, then they're going to provide better service for our community. So we've really been keeping an eye on that. We had a contract with a mental health provider to give some counseling. That was so popular that we really ran out of appointments for that person. So now we have another, I'm sorry, the name escapes me, the what?
The Counseling Team International, TCTI for short.
There you go. And it's more of a web-based approach. So 24/7, they can log in, they can call a number, they can get immediate access to someone if they need it, and that other provider didn't provide that. So we're making some strides in that area. So that's well underway. This new plan that we're talking about, so our comprehensive analysis and our strategic plan, these are the touch points with reimagining. So we're going to end up having better relationships with our community, more engagement, going to use more data to tell our stories and communicate with our community. Obviously, we're evaluating the staffing levels. That's what we're doing now. We're going to improve our responsiveness and hopefully reduce response times to our emergency service response, expand the use of our unarmed alternative responders, and address the conditions that contribute to people feeling unsafe. So the comp plan, these are the different focus areas that these plans touch. Public safety, obviously, organizational excellence, and community livability. So jumping right into our strategic plan, we spent about the last year working with a consultant, not only on the comprehensive plan, but also on the strategic plan. They were kind of on simultaneous paths moving forward. And we just finished up that work. So this 5-year plan will guide our policy decisions, our budget, and our operational decisions for the next 5 years. And as you can see, it was informed by the comp plan reimagining, the 2022 city satisfaction survey we really paid attention to because that gave us some recent data on how people were feeling. Internal surveys and focus groups with our own employees, and the one community plan. So the first thing we did was take a look at our current state, how we're doing right now. And with that city satisfaction survey, we all know that some of the feedback was good, some of it was bad. 93% of those that responded to the survey, they feel safe in their neighborhoods, but 53% of them don't feel safe outside of their neighborhoods when they enter the larger city. 71% feels that OPD treats people with dignity and respect, yet 40% distrust the criminal justice system. 45% want more communication, and we know that the police department and policing was in the top 3 of the things that they were interested in. We are understaffed. And we know that because we have to pull officers from specialty units in order to meet our minimum staffing guidelines. And we do have some serious recruitment challenges. And this is kind of a new thing for us. For years, we haven't had recruiting challenges. We've been able to rely on the fact that our pay is good and our schedule is good. Our patrol officers work at the time, a unique schedule, and gave them a lot of time off to spend with their family and to have that work-life balance. Now, other departments have caught up with us in pay, have stolen our schedule, so almost everyone around us has the same pay and the same schedule as us. And it's really impacting our recruiting efforts. So we need to take a look at internally what we can do to improve that. One thing I wanted to mention with the 40% distrust in the criminal justice system, the next time we do a survey, I really think that needs to be broken down a little bit. What does the criminal justice system mean to the people that are answering the question? From what we hear, people are fairly supportive of the police, but then they get upset when the courts release them. Right? So what does the criminal justice system mean in that statistic? I think that needs to get drilled down a little bit the next time we do a survey. Yep. So our strategic plan has 3 really goals, right? So the 3 goals, they're broken down into goals, strategies, and actions, but the 3 on here are the goals. So enhance community trust and sense of safety, increase and support resources to reduce crime, and then we have one focused on our own internal OPD culture and communication. And then each one of those goals has a strategy. So for the first one, enhance community trust and sense of safety, the strategy is to proactively earn and grow public trust, support and collaborate through increased community policing and engagement. And there you have some action items on each one. We were going to improve our response time, hopefully through this increased staffing. We're going to add some trained alternative responders, continue de-escalation as our best practices. We have a already very low use of force rate, and we obviously want to continue that through our de-escalation efforts. Develop a comprehensive communication strategy. Again, people want to hear from us. And we really don't have a formal strategy to get that done. We've added a Facebook page, which has been huge, got a lot of positive feedback on that, but we need to formalize our own communication strategy. And we want to increase and diversify community outreach, education, and engagement. The second one, increase and support resources to reduce crime. Going to maximize crime prevention and reduction through focused initiatives and strategic investments in training and preparedness. And this is all about just preparing us for our jobs, right? Add staff to meet the community's level of expectation, develop a recruitment and retention strategy. Again, that's very important. Enhance accessibility and community outreach with a West Side station. That's one of our goals. We have a presence on the west side right now. We have some office space over there, but it's not public facing. The community can't access it. So we want to change that. We want to have better staffing to address crime trends. And then you kind of heard a similar sentiment from me with the flock conversation. We need to start leveraging this emerging technology to help us meet some of our crime fighting goals. And maintain strong internal culture and communications. So build a positive workforce culture, creating pathways for lateral and upward mobility. Again, making sure that we're retaining the employees that we have by giving them pathways internally in the department. Continue to grow a robust workforce, continue to focus on employee health and wellness, create formal succession plans, improve communication internally, and ensure that the staff have the tools, facilities, and supplies that they need to do their work safely. That was down and dirty, but that's the outcome of our strategic plan. For the next 5 years, that's what we're going to be working on. And really, what helped guide the strategic plan is this next piece, and that's our comprehensive department analysis. So we used a company called the Center for Public Safety Management, which is an offshoot of ICMA, the International City Managers Association. So we used them, again, it was about a year process, started back in February of 23. And the more we talked to them about our staffing wants, not our wants, but the staffing evaluation that we wanted them to do, they talked more about a comprehensive look. So they came in and they looked at everything we did. They looked at our administration, operations, our different crime analysts, our evidence room, our records, how we handle our fleet. They looked at everything. And they came up with, whoops, I'm sorry, before I say that, I want to brag a little bit about one of the things they said about us. So in the executive summary, I'll let you read that, or maybe you already did, but they were very positive about us, right? They recognize that we're a progressive police department, and we have a long-standing history of embracing change and trying to make our internal culture reflect that of our community. And I'm very proud of that. And that's all the work that our staff does every day. So they get the credit for that, but I'm just super proud of that. So we have 94 different recommendations that they came up with. 94. That's a lot, right? But it covers the entire gamut. Some of them are as simple as the best practice in the evidence room is to have a camera pointed towards the money, right? That makes sense to us, right? It makes sense. So it covers the gamut all the way from those types of things to staffing suggestions and workflow. So they looked at everything. The methodology they used is it's kind of interesting. And I'll get to the staffing piece in a minute, but the methodology for the entire analysis they made was they collected data. They had, before they came to our department, they reached out to key members, line level staff, mid-managers, and our executive team, and they conducted interviews, mostly over Zoom. Then they came on site, spent 3 days, I believe, 3 long days here, talking with anyone who would talk to them, talking with everybody, right? They visited every aspect of our department. They created internal focus groups of our employees that they spoke with. They spoke with Stacey Ray, who was integral in this as far as keeping our eye on the ball with all the reimagining and the other comp plan recommendations and goals. So they came, they talked with everybody, and then they went away. And when they took with them a whole bunch of data, they contacted TCOM, which is our dispatch center, got years worth of data, and they took a bunch of data away from us as well. And then they went back and they crunched all their numbers. And they used this rule for their staffing. And the methodology they used in the staffing is this rule of 60. Most departments use some kind of ratio. What am I? Per capita, thank you. Most departments use that. And it's an easy evaluation to make. And you can take it across the nation and you can see how you compare to other people, right? It's an easy one to make, but it's not always accurate. So what they came up with is the rule of 60. And it's no more than 60% of, 60% of your officers should be deployed in the patrol division, and no more than 60% of an officer's time. Now, not a specialty unit officer, but an officer assigned to a district who's responding to 911 calls. No more than 60% of their time should be obligated and encumbered by responding to calls and doing the tasks associated with that, writing the police reports, logging the evidence, interviewing the witnesses, all that type of stuff. No more than 60% of their time should be encumbered like that, and they call that the saturation index. So they looked at our workflow, and they looked at the time that it takes us to do things. So they took a snapshot of the summer of '22, and both during the weekday and the winter. I'm sorry, the weekday and the weekday. Oh, this is summer, I'm sorry. Weekdays and weekends, thank you. It's getting late. So on the left, you can see there the weekdays. The orange line is when they're actually on a call, right? When they're telling dispatch that I am on scene handling some type of call for service. That green line that's above is not only taking the orange line into account, but also adding in the time that they're taking to write their reports, logging evidence, whatever else that comes with that call. And you can see there on the left that during the weekdays, that their time on scene is under 60%, it's about 58%, but their peak is hitting 74, 75% for long periods of time. And on the right, you can see that on the weekends, the same type of graph, with the peak being 79%. If you look at the winter on the left, you can see that our peak is 76%, but look at the time that we are spending above that 60%, somewhere around 9:30 or so in the morning, all the way until almost midnight or 11 o'clock at night. So it's really showing how our staff is dealing and overburdened with these calls for service. And on the right is the weekend. And when I first looked at this, I thought to myself, it's kind of weird that during the weekdays, we're more saturated with calls than on the weekends. That doesn't make sense to me. But then I quickly remembered, on the weekends, we have more staff on duty. So that workload is spread out, so it's not as saturated. So that's why you see the discrepancy there. So on the weekends, we have more staff on duty, Friday and Saturday nights. Then it spreads out the workload a little bit. And that also shows you how 1 or 2 extra officers, because it's not a lot, is very effective in bringing down that saturation. So the next couple of slides, I want to talk about our calls for service. So we roughly have about 56,000 calls for service each year. In '23, we had just over 18,000 on the west side, 17,000 and change downtown, and just over 20,000 on the east side of town. The next few slides are going to talk about our district officers, and when they have, I'm going to try and explain this right. Our district officers on the west side, this graph is going to show that they had to leave their patrol district and go downtown and go east, downtown over 1,000 times and east over 500 times, because the downtown patrol car and the east patrol cars were busy. They were obligated doing something else. And this is only counting the times when they had to leave their districts to go east and downtown, when they were ending up being the primary investigating officer. So they're the ones that had to go from the west all the way east to investigate a crime, interview the suspect, interview the witnesses, process the crime scene if there is one, log any evidence, and then write the reports. This does not count the numerous times they have to leave their district just to go cover somebody or be a backup officer for somebody. This is when they're actually handling a call for service in another area. So they had to leave the west side, go downtown over 1,000, leave the west side, go east over 500. Then you can see the same thing for the east side officers. They had to go west over 300 and downtown almost 1,500 times and handle the calls down there. And then obviously our downtown officers are being pulled in both directions. So what that means is the number of times that a 911 first responder, right, the people that are responsible for answering our 911 calls, had to leave their assigned districts and go handle other calls throughout the city. That's the total. So 845 times, and on the west, 1,497 on the east. And then, I'm sorry, these are the number of calls that someone had to come in to. That's right. So 845 times on the west side, another officer had to come and handle their calls for service.
Chief, may I ask a clarify? Is it okay? Is this of the 56,000 calls in a year, or is this of some smaller division of time?
No, this is the 56,000.
Okay,
This
thank
is
you.
throughout the year.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 2023, on the west side, 845 times, somebody had to come up there and handle that call for service for the west car. Then you look at response times. On the left, there are our priority calls. So our in-progress calls, mostly against people, right? The disturbances, the assaults, some property crime if it's a burglary, something like that. The in-progress violent calls are on the left. And our average response time to the priority calls, priority one calls being the most serious, obviously, is just over 10 minutes. Priority twos are just about 14.5 minutes. And on the right are truly non-priority calls, right? It's a burglary that happened sometime over the weekend. Someone got home from a vacation and noticed that someone broke into their house. It's a theft that, someone's car got broken into and there's no suspects and they don't know when it happened, right? Truly clear calls. A lot of the time we take the report mostly for insurance purposes, that type of thing. Those are the calls you're seeing on the right. Those are averages. We know that sometimes our priority one responses are quicker than that, maybe 8 or 9 minutes. And we also know that our priority four calls sometimes take hours for us to get to. And those are the ones we hear about. Those are the ones that we get complaints about. And you might hear about them too, but sometimes it takes us hours to get there. So getting right to the meat of it, the recommendations that the CPSM came up with, broken down into different divisions. So patrol, they're suggesting 8 more officers and 2 sergeants, 1 more outreach specialist for our familiar faces unit, 2 more officers in our neighborhood policing. They looked at the workload in records and in detectives, and they are asking for 1 more program assistant in records and 1 additional crime analyst in detective. I'm sorry, did I say detectives before? 1 program assistant in records, 1 crime analyst in detectives. And then we also asked them to look at annexation. So they took the data that our dispatch center has for the area in the urban growth area. And they did the same type of analysis. And they're saying it would, if we move forward with annexation at some future date, they're saying 6 officers is what we would need. I'm sorry? 6 additional officers.
For the whole urban growth area or just
For
the south side?
southeast,
Okay.
southeast, I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, just the southeast. So then we start looking at prioritizing implementation, right? We have to look at these now, look at the 94 recommendations, look at our action items for our strategic plan and come up with some kind of implementation plan. And really it all starts with building capacity to do those things. So we have to start with hiring. So that's where we'd like to start with. Right now we're budgeted for 79 officers. At the time of this slide, we had 5 openings, but now we have 7. 1 retired and 1 went to another department. 38 admin staff is what we're budgeted for, and we currently have 6 openings. So we do have some work to do with our hiring. And again, it comes down to that recruiting and retention. We need to look at creative ways to make us an attractive department. So this is my proposal. We know we have money from Proposition 1 coming in sometime this year. Certainly not the full yearly allocation, but at some point that money will start trickling in. I believe August is when we might start seeing that, July. So on the left, you'll see I broke this down into phases. 1 that uses the Proposition 1 money, and 2 gives a snapshot of how much it would take to fully implement all of the recommendations, all of the staffing recommendations. So on the left, the first item there is to fully fund our body-worn and in-car video program. We've been using one-time funds, whether it be ARPA or some other fund. We've been using one-time funds to keep that going, and that's coming to a head. So this is actually good timing with the Prop 1 money. So the first $740,000 off the top is gonna go to shore up that funding in our budget. We'd like to start with a crime analyst, 8 officers and 1 sergeant, 1 familiar faces, so that outreach specialist. We know there's some more good work that they can be doing, so we want to add that. We need to start adding to our patrol fleet. Patrols are a whole nother the vehicles are a whole nother conversation I can have with you. 2 is just a Band-Aid. Our patrol vehicles, we really need to make an investment in adding some more to that. So start off with 2, just to help alleviate the issue. And then the judge is asking for $30,000 for jail alternatives. And what that is they offer a wide range of pretrial programs, right? To try and keep people out of custody, whether it be electronic monitoring or there's another system dealing with alcohol where they wear some kind of bracelet that senses alcohol usage. Those things cost money, and typically those are passed on to the person who is charged with the crime and wants to avail themselves of that program. That's not right? People that can't afford it are being kept away from using that program. That doesn't seem right to her. That doesn't make sense. So she's asking for $30,000 to help offset the cost of people going into that program that can't afford it. So $30,000 for there, and then $200,000 as a placeholder for whatever recommendation comes out of the community oversight of law enforcement. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think anyone does yet, but $200,000. I know, I do too, but I didn't want to say it. Okay, all right. So yeah, $200,000 as a placeholder for that. And then on the right, you can see to fully implement all of their recommendations, I should say most of their recommendations, we need to come up with another roughly $950,000. And that includes a lease to expand our west side footprint and make that more of a public facing, so we can do some community outreach, maybe hold some community meetings in there. add 2 to our neighborhood policing unit, so 2 officers there, 2 more officers on patrol, that program assistant for records that they recommended, and then another 2 cars because they have to drive something. And I'll take any chance I get to get more patrol cars. So 2 more cars, and that equals about $950,000. So, as we go along, I feel like I missed something here. Okay, so as we go along, we're going to track and report on our response times, right? We have to update our website, and I'm envisioning more of a dashboard type thing, right? So it's constantly updated. We're constantly keeping the community informed of what that of our actions. Not exactly sure what that looks like yet, but we need to update our website. I do want to be more involved in the next community survey. Get some quite specific questions about the police department in there. Do an internal survey of our staff again, and then after we've had 2 years of full implementation, so it might take us a while to get to full implementation, but after we've been there for 2 years, I want to do this 60% analysis again and see how much we move the needle on that saturation index to give us an idea of how we're doing. So at the end of this, at the end of our strategic plan, at the end of implementing all of the items in our comprehensive analysis, we're going to have an appropriately staffed police department. Our response times are going to be reduced. We're going to have additional resources for our neighborhoods, better communication with our community. We'll have some dedicated resources to addressing crime trends, more alternative responders, and we'll be able to continue our momentum with the reimagining recommendations. So that was a whole lot of info. I know you guys have questions, but hopefully at the end of this, if everyone is basically in agreement with this approach, at some point, if there is consensus, you'll see it again on a consent calendar and then eventually on a consent calendar again with a quarterly budget amendment. So I feel like I talked a bunch.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Any questions from council? Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Parsley.
Yeah, I'm curious what recruitment and retention efforts look like. I know it's part of the strategy to create a strategy around that, but if we've currently got 7 vacancies in the police department, obviously those would get filled before we can start filling additional positions. So what does that look like? What does a timeline look like? What are other police departments doing to try to compete in this space?
Yeah, thank you for that. We need to come up with a strategy. We need to do some thinking about what that looks like. This vehicle issue is a big deal. We hear about it all the time. We have part of the issue is our hybrid vehicles. They absolutely help contribute to our climate goals, but they're not really designed to work 24 hours a day. We're having issues with the equipment, all the doodads that are in police cars, right? The computer, the lights, there's a constant drain on that, and they're breaking down. So we need to take a look at our cars. We need to take a look at just the day-to-day things, the working conditions, not necessarily salary and benefits, but the working conditions, and see if we can improve those to try and draw more people. The officers that we're losing to other agencies is as perplexing as this sounds, is a lot of it is the vehicles. They spend, on our schedule, they spend almost 11 hours a day in that vehicle. They take a lot of pride in it. It's their office. And when we have them share it with up to 3 other officers, they get battered, they get torn apart. It's a working condition that the newer officers pay a lot of attention to. And it's those types of things that we're gonna have to start looking at.
I'm trying not to smile here because the first time I did a ride along, I just remember looking down at the cup holder and be like, oh, who cleans the cars?
Yeah, nobody, yeah.
Well, I mean, hearing that, it makes me wonder, like, we can move ahead and say, yeah, here's some more money to hire some more people. But if the challenges around being able to even fill the spots that we have and keep people in those positions have to do with, having equipment and vehicles and things like that, it just makes me wonder if, we shouldn't shift things around a little bit because, well, like I said, we can authorize funding to hire more officers, but, people have to want to come here and work for us. So I'm just speaking off the top of my head here. I'm also, in terms of like going out and checking on that 60%, the rule is 60% in 2 years after we've done full implementation. Like, does full implementation mean phase 1 and phase 2 and everybody's out of academy and like on the streets? Because that could be like several years.
I wouldn't wait for the phase 2. Phase 2, when they look at the 60%, they're only looking at 911 call responders, the patrol division. And phase 2 only has 2 additional officers in that. So I don't think I would wait for those last 2 officers to get hired.
Okay.
I would base it after full implementation of phase 1. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and okay, so full implementation of phase 1. Okay, that's kind of what I was hoping you were going to say, because I kind of want to see that we're like at least trending in the right direction before we go full bore and do the whole thing. And I, also just thinking about like, if vehicles is that big of a challenge, I wonder around like timing for when we start bringing in the public safety tax and delays in hiring. And if that buys enough, in the budget to be able to bring on more vehicles so that it can help with the challenge of hiring.
I totally agree, and at the risk of making my boss mad, because I haven't talked to him about this at all yet, that would be what I'd ask for. I guess I would ask for, in my perfect world, we would get the go-ahead and these positions funded, but knowing that it's going to take us a while. And we would use that money, that salary savings between now and whenever we're able to get the people on board to dedicate to vehicles, to start building up our fleet to help alleviate that. That's what I'd ask for.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to bring it up because I know there's other thoughts around like, what we can spend public safety dollars on. And it sounds like there's, competing requests around that. But, I really want to figure out how we can fill the spots that we currently have vacant. Correct. And like that, for me, that would be a priority. So thank you.
Yeah, before we go to Councilmember Parsley, City Manager Bernie.
Thank you. Just a couple things I wanted, as Chief talked, we've talked about this vehicle issue, just to make sure it's, it's really clear. It's about take-home cars, right? So a lot of other agencies allow their officers to take their cars home, and they I think statistics show, as the Chief mentioned, they take really good care of their own vehicles, and it gets really frustrating, as he said, when you share. And so it's a perk to some extent that's offered in other agencies that we don't have. I think swing shift right now is the only shift that has take-home. It's a bit of an incentive, I think, for those that are working swing, but the other shifts do not. So I just wanted to make sure that point was really clear about when the Chief's talking about, that's what he's talking about. And the other thing, Chief, I thought you might mention is on the 60% saturation rule, why the other 40% is important, right? And that's the time that they can do community building, right? If they're only going call to call to call, and that's all they spend their time, they don't have time for follow-ups. They don't have time to go drop by the person's house who was burglarized a couple weeks ago to check on them and see how they're doing and just build community. So maybe you could talk about that, because I think that 40% piece is really important to the work you're doing.
Yes, yes, thank you for that. And that's where the community level of expectation comes in, right? It is the follow-up. It's the checking in with the burglary victim that they had a week ago. It's stopping by a block party. It's stopping by anywhere just to say hi. When they did this study with the 60% rule, when they came up with that figure, and Sam read a little bit about it, and he might be able to talk about it as well, but there's something it's just human nature, it's human condition, that when you hit a certain saturation point, your brain tells you, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to do this. And no different with police officers, right? Their brain, once they hit that point, is telling them, I'm too busy to go and check in with that victim because I know any minute now I'm going to get another call. So I can't get tied up doing this stuff that I want to be doing because I know that there's another 911 call that's going to come any minute. If I did that right.
He did that right. But the additional part of that in the white paper and the academic research that we've gone through is that once a police officer reaches that level of saturation, once you get it doesn't just go away. So when you drop below the 60%, the police officer doesn't automatically then just say, well, we're under 60%, let's just go out and start, looking for people that are burglarizing houses. If they become used to being saturated, that transition back to what we would like them to be doing doesn't necessarily always happen. It happens longitudinally when there's more time where they're exposed to levels that are lower than that saturation point. It makes sense if you understand what we're talking about. It would make sense to me from a human nature standpoint that makes sense. And so more people get you a lower level of saturation, and thus you get the behavior that you want, not just from the number of people, but because the activity is different, it's lower. So.
Councilmember Parsley, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
That makes a lot of sense from the medical world. And why the staffing can be difficult in the hospitals as well. And so, okay, I loved where Councilmember Madrum was going, because that was where I was also going. So 2 points. What is, besides vehicles, because let's face it, we're not going to be able to get a take-home car for everybody. What is the next thing that we could be using to attract people? And I know living wages, all that stuff, but is there, you talked about schedule. We had an enviable schedule. Do you have the second best until we can get more cars and better cars?
The second best recruiting tool, the second best change we can make? I'd have to think about that. I think just knowing that we're working on the problem, or knowing that there's a commitment that we're moving in a certain direction would help a lot.
Okay.
I think there's a desire there's a desire on our staff's part that there's a recognition of the complexity of being an officer in Olympia, because it is different than being an officer in Lacey. It is different than being an officer anywhere else. We expect a lot out of our officers, and just the recognition of that complexity and how do we show that is something that we're going to have to work on.
That's great, thank you. One of the things I was doing, I noticed that in your budget, there's about $340,000 in one-time monies that in subsequent years, we could potentially use for other things like vehicles.
Correct.
Are we also getting, when we get these vehicles, 2 questions. How long is the lead time? Like we've heard about fire trucks, it's like can be up to 3 years. The second part is, when we get these vehicles, are we doing that lease back type program where we're starting to put away and lay away money for the replacement cost?
Yes, yeah, so you are right, $340,000 So it's about 85,000 a patrol car. We pay that up front. But then every subsequent year, we're also putting away money to purchase the next one. Amortized over 5 years, I think, 6, something like that. So yes, it is, initial expense is 170 for 2, but then obviously year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, though, that decreases. And the lead time, it's very hit and miss. There is no scheduled release of these cars. It's very unpredictable. Sometimes they'll say they're a year out, and then all of a sudden they'll say we're doing a run on them, and if you want 20, you can have them. It's very unpredictable, especially with the hybrids.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see for the hybrids and the electrics, because there's certain vehicles that are going to be very tough for us to go to EV. I was talking to Gary Franks about garbage trucks today for that. I hadn't even considered you're running computers, you're running all these electronics in this car, which are very, very different. So, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cooper, followed by Mayor Pro Tem Lynn.
I'm doing that thing when you're so full that you start disconnecting because you're sure that you're too busy. That's happening in my head right now. It's easy to imagine when you're working under that workload that you would just be looking over your shoulder for the next thing and not do the proactive work that you need to do that's not putting out fires, for lack of a better analogy there. I think the challenge for me in this is knowing that we're understaffed to do regular policing and wanting to hear what the next cutting edge thing we're going to come up with is, right? And needing to do right by the needs and the volume that our community generates for the police department. And so I respect what you brought forward. I think it's a good path. I do worry about the vehicle situation. What's that number? How many are we talking about to get to an ideal state?
30 more.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's more than I was thinking.
Yeah.
I don't even have a great idea, so.
Yeah. It would certainly involve some kind of phase-in over the years, yeah.
Well, while I was waiting for my turn, I was looking up the SAFER grants to see if they had a law enforcement, category, because that's what we need is expansion of our operation, one-time grant money, and, honestly, that might be something that we think about talking to our delegation about as they do congressional earmarks. We're not throwing cash at people to come to us. We're not taking laterals. We're building the police department that future police officers want to work at. And so that upfront investment in cars to retain that makes a lot of sense to me. Could we look at an approach to Congresswoman Strickland or something around that in the space that she's in? Because it's the kind of thing we're not going to get an opportunity to do unless we come up with it one time. We can't wait a year to implement this to get 30 cars. It's just not possible, right? And so thinking about that, I also though wonder. I would bet that if I had the vacancy rate for every law enforcement department on I-5, ours is way better.
We're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're not throwing, what I read the other day, $45,000 bonuses in one of the departments up in the Puget Sound area.
Right.
And can we borrow their cars?
Might be something to look at.
They're just sitting, right? Seriously. and that's where the late night takes control of me. And Chief, I think this is a great conversation, and I think we'll all put our creative thinking behind how to help you out. And right away, I think we need to up our normal fleet investments beyond this conversation.
And if I could just say, I totally agree that I would much rather spend the money on improving working conditions, like vehicles, like other things like that, than do some kind of, hiring incentive or retention bonus. I would much rather have the money go towards something like this.
And the other comment I wanted to make is I'm really happy that you didn't come and ask for a bat helicopter or a Batmobile today, like we're seeing in the newspaper. So this is common sense approach to policing.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen, followed by Councilmember Gilman.
When you're doing. Sometimes it makes sense for law enforcement to have helicopters, that's all I'll say. It's just about telling the story about why it's a need and it's not a toy. Anyways, I really appreciate this this presentation. I'm hoping that Chief, you could talk to us, or the deputies, if you could talk to us a little bit about what you heard from department staff at all levels, right? And so, so I know there's a variety of things that informed the 188-page packet, and so, like, what did we hear from staff? Of course, understanding that getting more FTEs is going to increase capacity for other things, and that's a huge bonus in the workplace. But yeah, so I'm just curious, you know, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, did people share why they stay at the Olympia Police Department, why they choose Olympia, why, or, you know, how was morale sort of at the beginning of this journey of doing this staffing study, or strategic planning, you know, and so, like, so what did that look like, and what were the touch points with folks in your team, and what did we hear? I'd be really interested.
I think we'll tag team this response. We heard a lot about our members really wanting to go out and be proactive and serve their communities, and being really frustrated by the staffing constraints, and there being a lot of pressures in the volume of calls, and so it's really hard for them to go out and serve their community in the way that they would like to. There was a lot of great feedback about wanting to have more knowledge about upward mobility, understanding what it means and what it takes to move to the next rank and the next rank. And so there's some career development that we need to work on to improve that. Boy, we're talking a lot about vehicles, but this is such a big sticking point for our staff. If you were really to think about coming to work and sitting in a space that belongs to somebody else and you have no control over, does it break down on you? Does the computer work? Does all the technology work? So that was really a consistent theme. They recognize that they do have a lot of excellent equipment and technology. They are very appreciative of the equipment and the investment. I'll turn it over to DC Costello.
Well, the elephant in the room is these incentives, and that, so you're always going to hear that. They're always going to, because part of this kind of generational thing that we've seen in the last 10 years here and everywhere else in law enforcement is you end up with a younger workforce, and that's a different set of values. And so oftentimes you'll hear about, well, the sheriff's office is doing this, or King County's doing this, or whatever it is, and we're left to ask, what does that do? Who does that get? If the reason you're leaving to go somewhere else is money and only money, one, it's a flash in the pan, and two, does that get the person that we're looking for to police the city that we live in? And if it's not, then maybe that's not the best plan. And it's a pretty slippery slope. But we do hear that, that's a thing. But again, it's really about working conditions. It's about, it is, you know, no one's going to use that 60% terminology, but it is what they're describing. And that is when you're overwhelmed, you can't do the things that you signed up to do this job in the first place for. It's a slog, and nobody wants to be involved in a slog. Nobody wants to be involved in something that's just take the vehicle prowl, take the burglary, take the domestic, and never go out and talk to little kids in a park. Nobody wanted to do that. That's not what they signed up for. But if that's what they're doing, there's a certain wear and tear on you over time where you don't feel like you're making a difference. And so that's a battle that we fight daily as far as morale goes. It's just that trying to find different ways. So one of the things that we can do is look for different opportunities, especially assignments, things like that, so that people can get out of the patrol division if they don't choose to get promoted, or it doesn't work out that way in their career path, that they have other things that they can do rather than every day just come and do the same thing every single day for 30 years. If we can find a way for them to go to detectives, broaden their skills, serve the community in a different way, they value that and the community is better for it. And so there are a lot of things like that that we can expand and look at ways and places that officers can go. So we hear a little bit about that as well. So, and with staffing, again, it's a self-fulfilling thing. It's circular, so that's what I'd say.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that adds a lot of context, what you both shared. And I feel like we're hearing a lot about money. We are not a police department that underpays staff. I mean, they are paid well. I feel like someone needs to say that.
Yeah, you're not wrong. We pay well, but others pay well too. And I think if you'd look across, certainly the state, I think public safety salaries have just increased. And that's just the way it is. That's the market right now. So, yeah, you're not wrong. We pay well. Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Gilman, followed by Councilmember Vanderpool.
Well, I certainly appreciate this conversation about how you get into reactive mode and you're just kind of the ball in the pinball machine. So I would really value having more opportunity for our patrol officers to both follow up and be proactive and engaged. I think that's a really important value and priority out of this spending proposal. One of the things that I suspect drives the 60% that we've also talked about with the fire department is calls that maybe historically weren't calls, that if somebody's uncomfortable talking to a stranger who's sitting on the park bench in front of their business, so they want a uniformed, armed public employee to come and ask the person what they're doing there. That to me is a very low priority use of a really valuable and finite resource. So I think the reimagining isn't done yet, because as a community we have to figure out some other ways. In my ride-along yesterday, a lot of our time was helping people who were afraid to say something to somebody who was in their proximity and they were uncomfortable by their presence. And so they thought maybe they needed an armed person to come and ask the person, hey, what are you doing? You know, and it's like, I wish they would have had their grandma or somebody to just open the window and say, hey, what are you doing? You know, it's, anyhow, so I think part of it is also rethinking what we prioritize, 1, 2, 3, 4 priority, and what warrants the response of an officer. Because I think part of reimagining that we haven't gotten to yet is that we can talk about like the DEI work helping us to have better one-on-one interactions, that the officer will be less biased. But if our policies and the laws we're enforcing are still focused on protecting private property and people being uncomfortable interacting with a very poor person, then that's still, it's extremely biased and classist, and it's not fair. So I think that for me, we have to continue to take some of this load off by rethinking what our officers are doing and maybe sending them out to the schoolyard and lowering the priority of going to respond to a dentist coming to work and there's somebody sleeping under the window next to the patient chair. Maybe there's somebody else besides an officer who can deal with that interaction. And I think there's a shift in people's expectation about what is stranger danger, and also there's a shift in what's the perception of authority and who has the authority to speak to another person. Anyhow, it seems silly to me that we're using these patrol officers to help ask somebody to move along because another person's uncomfortable with their being in proximity. That's, I also really hope, and I know this is always my soapbox, but I really hope that as we imagine this additional staffing and training, that we're continuing to figure out ways to lower the risk of escalating a situation into violence, especially around mental health crisis, that I think that's work that we're certainly engaged in, and I'm really proud of the work that our officers are doing. But, each time we lose somebody, we're reminded that we have to continue to work that. And I guess just one last little illustration of why I think the rules we're enforcing are very biased, no matter how nice or well-trained our officers are, is that if you take a landlord and a tenant, and the landlord is kicking the tenant out or having a disagreement, we'll have, the long tradition of the sheriff comes to help with the eviction. If the tenant has a problem with the landlord, whether it's here or at a state agency, they're told to fill out a form or go get a lawyer. And it's the same thing with an employee and an employer. If an employee is causing a disruption in a workforce or in a workplace, we send an armed officer to escort them out or whatever we're going to do. But if the boss doesn't pay that week, you call L&I and you fill out a form and start a months-long process. So if we want to have equitable policing, I would say that it would treat working class people the same way as it does property owners and business owners. And that would help with a redistribution of what these calls are. So I support the package you're talking about, but I don't want us to call the reimagining done because we're better at the policing as it's been done for a long time. So that's, anyhow, I'm just excited about this moment, and I still want to keep dreaming about other ways to create public safety that isn't exclusively that patrol officer's responsibility by themselves. Thanks.
City Manager Bernie has a point on this just before going to Councilmember Vanderbilt.
And maybe this is where the chief's going to go too, but I just want to highlight to Councilmember Gilman's comments that, tonight we're talking about strategic planning and reimagining and staffing, but there's a multifaceted approach that we have right now to looking at public safety in Olympia, and one of those, which will come to you soon, is around community oversight. And part of that community oversight model is expanding the duties of your police auditor to do more policy review, to make sure our policies are best practices, and working alongside the chief and staff on their policies and the review. So I think we'll get at some of that through that work, and not just what's here with new staffing. And then the other thing, Chief, that it's not part of your recommendation here, but I also know you're working on a model of a community safety officer, which is that unarmed response that could come to some calls, and maybe you could touch on kind of what your vision is there, because that's something you're actively working towards.
Yeah, thank you. That is what I was going to mention. So I was going to say two things. So I'll start with the community service officer. One of my goals, when we closed down the jail, it created some capacity for us and this need for transport officers. But we don't arrest people every day of the workday, or I'm sorry, every minute of the workday. So they're going to have some capacity to do other things. And one of my goals at the end of this, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years, but at the end of this journey is to have these community service officers responding to more of those non-priority calls that we talked about. Not only will it give a response more in line with, I think, what our community expects, but it will also reduce some of those response times for those hours-long calls that people are waiting for. Now, that's easier said than done, right? That's going to be a very big lift. It's going to take a lot of discussions with labor and all kinds of things. But that is some of the building blocks that I'm trying to establish right now so it can move into that in the future. It's not going to be overnight, but that is the direction that I see us going. The second thing I wanted to say is I totally understand what you're saying, and in regards to the people feeling uncomfortable on the street and maybe calling the police when it might not be super appropriate. And we do train our officers to try and triage some of the calls that we go to. Because if you look around the nation at some of the instances where officers get in a use of force that might not be appropriate, sometimes it starts with, in my opinion, the officer really being set up, right? Someone is calling 911, reporting something that really isn't a crime in the first place. And just because officers always respond to calls, they decided to respond to this one, and things got out of hand. So we really train our officers to triage those things and think to themselves, why am I going to this? And should I be going to this in the first place? So I just wanted to mention that.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I would like to second a lot of what Councilmember Gilman is saying. When I did my ride-along on Sunday, I did notice some I learned a lot about how our process goes, and that we do training once a month, and a lot of places don't do training once a month, and that's why we're ahead of the curve of a lot of other places. But I've also learned, when I'm going out, some of it is much more important than others. And so there are those various levels of service, right? So our officers will have to respond to something that is as simple as going over to the 76 and waking someone up who's trying to take a nap, when there could be something more important going on the other side of town. And we have to make those decisions, right? And so I'm very curious about, as we start doing some more staffing, about this community service officer, about different forms of service for different types of calls, and trying to categorize that in a way that's, a patrol officer, and we only have 5 or 6 out at a time about, and under my understanding, we haven't changed that number in a long time, from what I heard, a very long time. And so I'm very curious about, as we do our staffing, continuing to think about where, what are the levels of service around that, right? What is the priority for certain types of incidents versus others? And I'm very interested in seeing that conversation continue.
Yeah, thank you. That's the plan, right? To come up with eventual list of criteria of what this community service officer program is going to handle. But again, I want to manage expectations. That is down the road. In getting to the question about the priority, if I understood the question right, it's all based on safety and is there any harm that's going to be caused, right? If there's a threat of injury or immediate threat of potential injury, or if someone's injured, those are always going to be priority calls. When you go on ride-alongs, sometimes what you'll see is an officer might handle a call that's a lower priority because they happen to be a block away from it. So they'll handle it really quick when they're on their way to another call. When we get really busy, you'll see officers handling phone details as they're driving to a priority call and doing it real quick and hanging up and then dealing with the priority call. So we do prioritize calls. Dispatch has a set criteria to do that. But sometimes we'll take something out of order if it just makes logistical sense based on where officers are at the time. And if they can get it done quickly, they might do that. They might swing by somewhere and do something really quick and then move on to the higher priority.
So a little bit beyond that, I'm thinking about the flexibility of service. So right now, for example, we have incidences that happen in certain parts of the community that would spike up at certain times, right? And then other instances that, it becomes quiet in a certain area. And so I'm very curious about how we adjust based on that. So let's say a speeding spike happens in one neighborhood, or several instances happen in a parking lot near a community center. How do we adjust those flexibilities?
Do you want to do this?
So there's multiple parts to the answer, and so I'm going to try to keep it brief. In a city that has a sample size of Olympia, it's hard to predict where things are going to happen. You can have 10 vehicle prowls in the southeast part of town in one night and then think it's going to happen again, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen for a month. And so putting people, that's hard. In New York, you can make a better prediction because you have more data to gather. So that's the first part. What I would point out, I think, as part of this, and then I'll let them speak to anything I'm sure I missed a whole bunch, is that when you look at the phased approach, one of the things that's in the second phase of the approach is additions to both the neighborhood policing unit and walking patrol. And what that does is not only does it create officers that are focused on proactive patrol exclusively for the most part, but it reduces the amount of call or saturation in the patrol officers and allows them to do more. So not only do we create specific units where people are engaged in proactive activity, but we reduce it in the patrol division as well. And so the other corollary to that, though, is that we have more people that are free to do exactly what you're saying. When we have a burglary series, we have additional neighborhood officers that are not tied to the radio that can just go do that kind of thing. So that's the idea. I think ultimately, I think you nailed it on the head. What we're looking for is a flexible resource that we can use when we go to CompStat, which is our data gathering and analysis component of the police department meetings. It's accountability for what we're doing about the crime. What's the crime? What are we doing about it? I'm translating Rich. This is his thing. Where is the crime and what are you doing about it? He asked me. He asked her. It sounds very basic about policing, but that's where we're at. And so the more options we have to respond, the better. And that's what we're trying to do with this staffing plan.
Thank you.
One moment.
Go to a CompStat meeting.
I couldn't make that out.
If council members haven't been to a CompStat meeting, it's well worth sitting through.
Okay. Councilmember Vanderpool, you have another follow-up before going? Okay, so Councilmember Parsley.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I know it's getting off topic for what you brought forward, but for public safety, I go back to Dr. Thelma. She said, we first have to ask ourselves what defines public safety for all parts of our community, and then figure out what are we going to do for the different aspects. Going to Councilmember Gilman, and maybe I'm thinking of fire department, if they are not to go to some of these calls because it's out of their purview, then who does? What's our gap analysis, and how are we going to fill that? I know we're talking about that with community policing, but we probably have to have a more in-depth, what's the gap? I mean, if we're saying this is not something we're going to use the police for or the fire for, that's still something we have to deal with, and who is going to deal with it? Because we have to address this, as our community is asking us to address this, for the people sleeping in the doorway, people that are having a behavioral health crisis. We still have to be able to deal with those gaps and do it appropriately. So that's my first statement, but I like your idea about the survey, because in 2021 and then 2023, we had some pretty broad questions. And I had the opportunity in 2021 to do my independent survey called a campaign. And 89% of the people in 2021 were mad about our homelessness. But what I found was they weren't really mad at Olympia. They were mad homelessness was happening. And they were feeling pain and conflict between the compassion for the people without shelter, but also understanding we couldn't fix it. So I would love to see some of these questions pulled apart a little more, because they can give false impressions to our community that everybody is upset. 40%, like you said, is it the justice system, but what part of it and what portion of that process? Because I think that's an important, because otherwise we're not going to actually be able to address the problem unless we understand what the people are saying to us. So just, I would ask, what defines public safety, and if not them, then who?
Councilmember Gilman.
I wanted to follow up. Councilmember Vanderpool mentioned speeding, and what I see is that we're doing a lot less traffic work and a lot more patrolling for other issues. I'm wondering if part of this study or part of other looking has been about traffic safety. Is there a change, since we've done less traffic patrol, is there a change in average speeds or the number of accidents? Or, because I just don't know if it doesn't sound like this particular plan intends to re-implement traffic, but I also don't know that it's been a problem, so.
Yeah, thank you. This plan would bring back our traffic unit. So we would be fully staffed with all of our current specialties plus what you saw. And I can get back to you on that. I actually don't know. I don't know what our accident rate is right now. And that's a good thing. It suggests that it's not a problem and it hasn't dramatically increased, but I don't have that answer for you, but I can get it, sure.
But we know that speeding is a problem, right? We've seen the increase in the data over the last few years, that speeding has continued to be a problem in the city, and I believe that point is explicitly made on the city's website. I forget where, but we acknowledge it ourselves. I just, where to start? And it's late. Okay, so there's a lot of recommendations here, and 94. And when we talk about the saturation index, the 94 recommendations, I know they're not all going to happen at once, but it seems like the ask for the additional FTEs or the officers, in my opinion, seems short-term. Because I can't quite imagine how we're going to implement, if we did, hypothetically, all 94 recommendations, and we're concerned about our saturation index, and the number of officers is only 10 or maybe 16. It just doesn't seem like long-term that's the solution. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. You're right. The plan, the staffing recommendations does not take into account any growth at all. It does not take into account an increase in population size. It does not take into account a sudden increase in calls for service or a change in the level of our service that would necessitate more employees. It doesn't take into account any of that. The staffing recommendations that they provided just get us to right now when they drew that data. So it doesn't take into account future growth at all. So thanks for pointing that out. And the 94 recommendations, 94 sounds pretty dramatic, but as you look through there, I think some of them are going to be easy to accomplish, and some of them are gonna take quite a while and some resources. I don't have a attack plan yet for those. I just don't. And that's really the next thing that we're gonna do. I want to kind of put to bed the staffing, either, no matter what your decision is. I want to address the staffing recommendations, and then we're gonna convene as a management group, and we're gonna look at the action items, and we're gonna look at the action items from the strategic plan and the 94 recommendations from the staffing study, and we're going to take a look at it, because we really haven't yet, and because we've been focusing on the staffing. And we're going to look at it, and we're going to come up with an implementation plan and a realistic timeline of what that looks like and what we're going to need to accomplish those. Most of what you've seen, most of what we've talked about merely focuses on the staffing recommendations, and it really doesn't take into account the others.
Yeah, thank you. It would be great to see, I guess, the next time you come to us with, where we're at with our saturation index, how many recommendations have we completed, see that comparison, whether or not it's getting better, worse as we work towards the recommendations in the plan. On recruitment, you mentioned a few things, but I was just wondering if, and answer this honestly, please. Is the perception of the city council's relationship with the police department have any effect on that?
I don't believe so. I think we're still seeing scar tissue from 2020. And so in 2020, you all know this, but there was an event that happened 1,000 or so, whatever, miles away. And there was a belief in the department that our community would say, that's horrible that that happened. Thank goodness we don't have that kind of issue here. And that's not what we heard. And I think if our staff was going to be honest, they would say that their feelings were hurt. And I think there's still some scar tissue from that we're working through.
I think the honest answer is, does it affect recruiting? No. Does it affect retention? Maybe. Yeah, and for the reasons that the chief mentioned. If we're being, I mean, that's the honest answer I think that we're dealing with right now.
And I'd just like to praise Olympia and praise the Olympia Police Department. We do a very thorough analysis when we have a critical incident involving an officer's use of force. And that's excellent. However, the impacts on staff are significant. When we have members that are off duty for a very long time, questioning the impacts to themselves, their families, that has a really significant toll on them. And many other agencies within this state, they don't do the amazing job that Olympia does in really fully understanding what happened. And that can be enticing to members once they really get into this work and fully understand the risks that are involved in the work. It can be enticing to go to another agency that doesn't have a thorough process. And I think we can see that our process is really important.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to imply that you don't answer questions honestly, by the way. But I'm just thinking about that because I think, and I hadn't thought about retention, obviously, so that's important to hear. But in your presentation earlier, you used the word acknowledging that we're a progressive department, but politically, that's a very charged word. And so the reason I was asking that is because that can be perceived as a direct speaking, I guess, to council police department relations. And so that's why I was asking that question. There's a few recommendations here that we talked about, a lot of internal things, and these are things that I think are eminent, in my opinion, of the recommendations that are more external facing. One of them being the duty to intercede policy, recommendation number 59, which is to specify what an officer must do. I think that's important to get that spelled out in black and white in the policy as soon as possible. And I think that would be consistent with our reimagining public safety work. Hiring one additional peer specialist for familiar faces to help with that case, the caseload. The recommendation 71, business watch program to respond to business crime. So that's something that can you talk to me a little bit about how we might go about doing something like that?
That was the first I heard of that program. So we need to do research on that. I can say that our neighborhood policing unit has relationships with the business community, and I believe that they're probably doing the things in that Business Watch program without that kind of label. if you agree with that.
In talking to our community policing lieutenant, that's exactly what he confirmed, is we're doing a lot of this work. We just don't have the specialized label on it. We've done a lot of work with the Washington Retail Association, working on organized retail theft and crime and serving our businesses. So if we need to adopt a label, we can.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at here is if we're, in theory, if we're having more officers, then we should see less of this kind of activity. At least to the average community member, that is probably what they would expect, or would be the expectation. Recommendation number 48. This is the one that I spoke to you about a couple months ago when we met. And it's the one that keeps me up at night, along with a lot of other issues. But it's the recommendation to engage state and local partners in developing a regional response or to protests and demonstrations, or which would be consistent with our crowd management plan. So I highlighted this section of the plan because I'm going to read it because I feel like it's really important what it says. It says, OPD said that although they received some assistance from the Washington State Patrol and some local agencies, including the Thurston County Sheriff, assistance is more the exception than the norm. In fact, OPD talked about some past experiences where a request for mutual aid went largely unanswered. Staffing up a local department with FTE officers for occasional events is not reasonable. It is concerning that OPD receives very little assistance from its neighbors when needed. An ideal solution would include state assistance and a pre-established regional team that can be deployed when pre-planned events take place. It will take time and require operating agreements and MOUs with participating agencies. So that's the thing. We are approaching the most consequential election of my lifetime. And after reading this, I feel like we're behind. And it concerns me. So, yeah, that's the recommendation that I think is eminent, in my opinion. And I was just wondering if we might talk sort of next steps of that, obviously at a future time, not tonight. We're not going to hash that out. But it is one that I think is very important that we get moving on. Yes, go ahead, Chief. Sorry.
I know we don't want to dwell on it tonight, but we have been training with our regional partners since the publication of this. We recently conducted training with the Sheriff's Office and Lacey, and I don't know about Tumwater, but I know Lacey and the Sheriff's Office, we had joint crowd management training with, and we've been having conversations with the command staff about working collaboratively when these things occur. So those conversations are underway. Great.
And I hope everyone involved feels the same sense of urgency that I do. Yes, it's a big one. And so for the 53% of residents that feel unsafe in the city, do you know exactly or specifically what is behind that feeling of feeling unsafe? Is it property crime? Is it homelessness presence? We can make a lot of assumptions, but is it data specific?
It's not data specific. That was right from the city satisfaction survey. So I think it was more of an open-ended question.
Which gets to the chief's point earlier about, whether it's a separate survey just around public safety or the next time we do a community survey, there's several questions we need to drill down on to better understand what the community really says. feeling unsafe can mean a lot, to your point, can mean lots of things. And if we don't really know what it is, then we just react in lots of different ways, and we may think we're getting at it and never get at it. So I think the chief's recommendation that we drill down in our survey a little bit differently is going to be really beneficial to his work and their work.
And I'll just try to wrap this up really quickly. I didn't see, and maybe I glossed over it, but anything said about our gun buyback program. And I was just wondering, like, where are we with that? Because I know we refunded it once, and I didn't see anything in the plan.
Yeah, thank you. No, there's nothing in the plan. We did fund it once. I came back to council with the results of that. And you asked me to see if we have any regional partners that would want to do that. No, the answer is no. So honestly, we haven't done anything with it since then.
That's helpful to know. And I think that's it. I feel my brain shutting down, so that's probably a good thing for all of us. So thank you very much. This is a very thorough work here. Obviously, very much looking forward to implementation along with, simultaneously with the reimagining public safety implementation. So thank you. Any other questions?
Can I just, one more thing? So as we're wrapping up, so I do have a general thumbs up on this approach, and I can present it to you in the form of a consent item, action item. Perfect. Thank you.
I just have a caveat to that, Mayor.
Sure.
That we also bring the $3.1 million gap to finance to talk about long-term, about how to buy those cars and fund phase 2. Because it's only $1 million a year, 3 years. I mean, look what we just did to start up a BLS transport unit. I mean, like, we can do things. We just have to take the time to plan for them.
Yeah, so just real quick, I think this needs a lot of conversation, but the one thing to remember is there's the one-time purchase, and then we set up a program to replace them. So there's an ongoing cost that gets set up to replace those cars on an every 5-year basis. So the $3 million is just up front, and then there's an ongoing after that. So we can talk more.
All right, any additional questions or comments? Thank you, chiefs. Seeing none, with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.